For weeks, the object hung at the edge of Mars's orbit like an unblinking eye, crystalline, silent, and impossibly steady. Astronomers had tracked 3I Atlas since its first glint near Jupiter, logging its trajectory the way you might track a drifting iceberg. But the closer it came, the less it resembled a natural fragment. Its spin was measured yet unpredictable, its brightness spiking in intervals too precise to be coincidence. As one researcher put it, it's as if someone is blinking at us from across the void. Before we plunge further into this mystery together, pause for a breath. Where are you listening from tonight? It's always striking how many curious minds gather here. If this quiet journey into the unknown is stirring your imagination, a gentle like and subscribe helps keep it alive and ensures you never miss the next step outward. The first real break came not from photographs but from pattern analysis. Graduate students at a small observatory fed the brightness fluctuations into a neural net trained on astronomical noise. What emerged was not random flicker, but a repeating grid, a three-dimensional lattice whose vertices corresponded to harmonics of Mars's orbit. In simple terms, the object was pinging the planet as though mapping or calibrating it. Spectroscopic scans followed. Within days, 2 separate teams confirmed materials no asteroid could sustain: layered carbon nanostructures, thin films of metallic hydrogen stabilized in vacuum, traces of exotic elements usually seen only in neutron star collisions. "We're not looking at a comet," said one astonished astronomer. "We're looking at a device. Imagine finding a perfect lens buried in desert sand. You know it wasn't formed by wind or tide." That's how 3I Atlas looked under this new scrutiny. Not a visitor but a node, perhaps part of something far larger, its behavior tuned not to Earth, but to Mars, and Mars itself was responding. Instruments began to register faint magnetic pulses from the planet's equator, synchronous with the object's flashes, like a call and response across millions of kilometers. Suddenly, the old categories, comet, asteroid, debris, fell away. The question shifted from "what is it?" to "what does it want?" And with each passing day, the alignment between 3I Atlas and Mars crept closer to perfect, like hands moving toward midnight on a cosmic clock. The deeper researchers dug into the data, the stranger the correspondence became. Each flash from 3I Atlas seemed to echo a subtle tremor on Mars, as though a planetary heartbeat were being teased out of dormancy. Magnetometers stationed on Phobos and Deimos, Mars's 2 moons, registered faint oscillations that no local phenomenon could explain. When plotted over time, the oscillations drew a spiral tightening toward a single point at the equator, an invisible node nobody had ever mapped. Across Earth, control rooms fell into a tense rhythm. Screens displayed not just orbits but waveforms, pulses and interference patterns. Graduate students, postdocs, and veteran astronomers began trading metaphors to explain what they were seeing: a tuning fork, a telegraph line, a symphony of invisible hands striking Mars like a drum. And still the object drew closer, its lattice growing more defined with each day. Then came the unexpected. Mars itself began emitting a low-frequency hum, detectable even by modest backyard radio dishes on Earth. Amateur astronomers reported it on forums. One even posted a spectrogram showing prime number intervals embedded in the signal, a hallmark in some minds of deliberate construction. Official channels declined to comment, but privately the data circulated like contraband between labs. "It's not just receiving," one scientist whispered over a secure line. "It's answering." Picture a spider plucking at its web, feeling for vibrations from the other side. That was 3I Atlas and Mars now. Every movement of the object produced a sympathetic ripple in the planet's magnetic field, and every ripple triggered a new pulse from the object, like a call and response between worlds. Meanwhile, new imaging from orbiters revealed subtle changes on the surface. faint hexagonal patterns emerging in the dust, visible only under low-angle sunlight, as if the crust itself was rearranging. No known geological process could create such uniform geometry at that scale. These weren't random fractures. They were instructions written into stone. By the end of the week, a picture was forming. 3i Atlas was not only scanning Mars, it was shaping it, or preparing it for something. And every model suggested the alignment window, when object and planet would be closest and most synchronized, was only days away. The solar system had been clockwork for eons, but now a hidden mechanism had slipped into place, and its hand was moving toward an unknown hour. By the time the first Martian dawn rolled across Olympus Mons after the signal appeared, the pattern was unmistakable. In the infrared, the planet glimmered with a faint honeycomb of energy nodes, like city lights mapped on a dark ocean. Orbiters traced these nodes from pole to pole, each perfectly spaced, as though laid out by an unseen surveyor. Even the dust storms seemed to funnel around them, spiraling as if guided by invisible fences. Something beneath the surface was stirring, and the object hanging above Mars was orchestrating the rhythm. On Earth, the chatter inside the secure astrophysics network became frantic. Data analysts were no longer asking if 3i Atlas was natural, but rather why it had chosen Mars. Was the red planet a testing ground, a storage vault, a staging area? Theories proliferated like wildfire, each more unnerving than the last. Some suggested it was scanning for life signatures, others speculated about dormant infrastructure, an ancient planetary port awakening after eons. Then came a discovery even the skeptics couldn't ignore. Using a newly reprogrammed spectrograph aboard an ESA orbiter, scientists detected low-frequency gravitational ripples emanating from Mars' core, faint but regular pulses not tied to quakes, tides, or solar wind. When plotted on a timeline, the pulses formed prime number sequences matching the flashes from 3i Atlas. Prime numbers, nature's most unambiguous signal of intelligence. The entire community went silent for a day, as though waiting for someone to say it aloud. Picture a submarine sending sonar pings through deep water and receiving echoes from the sea floor. That was Mars, and the object now locked in a slow cosmic conversation. Each pulse from the planet was matched by a flicker from 3i Atlas, and each flicker was followed by subtle surface changes, visible in high-resolution imagery. Frozen dunes shifted by centimeters overnight. Small fissures appeared, perfectly aligned with the hidden grid. It wasn't geological chance, it was choreography. And yet amid the fear, a strange sense of wonder grew. If 3i Atlas had crossed interstellar space to seed or awaken something, then Mars was not barren at all. It was a stage. "We've been thinking of planets as static," one mission scientist remarked. "But what if they're instruments waiting for the right touch?" As days passed, the interaction intensified. Instruments on Phobos registered measurable tugs from below, as though vast pistons were moving inside Mars. The object began rotating more slowly, each facet turning to face the planet like a giant multi-eyed lens. A thin aurora formed at the equator, visible even to backyard telescopes as a pale violet ring. For the first time in recorded history, Mars had a halo. Then came the microquake event. Seismometers in 3 separate locations recorded identical pulses, not random tremors but perfectly timed beats, 5 seconds apart, then 4, then 3. A countdown, a test of resonance. Nobody could agree, but the pattern was unmistakable. Government agencies quietly raised their alert levels, and yet, on public channels, official statements remained muted. No cause for alarm. Meanwhile, amateur radio operators reported something extraordinary. Tuning to very low frequencies during the night, they picked up a hum modulated in amplitude, faint but consistent. When played back at higher speed, the hum produced rising and falling tones like a melody without notes. Uploads of the sound spread across forums and theories proliferated. Some heard language, others heard music, a few heard a warning. Inside the control rooms, tension mounted. Was 3i Atlas preparing Mars for something incoming or preparing Mars to become something? Analysts modeled scenarios, a planetary-scale transmitter, a staging ground for replication, even a slow-motion terraform engineered from orbit. None of the models ended with a quiet return to normal. The scariest part was the timescale. Every new measurement pushed the predicted alignment point closer. Instead of months, it was now days, perhaps hours. Mars, which had been a silent neighbor for billions of years, was about to cross some invisible threshold, and the object, whether probe, seed, or instrument, was acting with deliberate patience. Yet, amidst the ominous numbers, an undeniable beauty unfolded. The aurora above Mars thickened, strands of turquoise and violet weaving into braided curtains visible even in long-exposure amateur photos from Earth. The planet seemed to hum like a cosmic bell struck by an unseen mallet. Some scientists whispered, almost ashamed of their excitement, "We're watching first contact, not invasion." Others countered, "We're watching an experiment, and we're the bystanders." As the alignment window narrowed, a final anomaly emerged. High-resolution radar detected substructures under Mars' crust at each node, hexagonal chambers echoing with faint electromagnetic signatures. The pattern matched no geological feature, but did match something else, a scaled-down version of 3i Atlas's own lattice, as if the planet were growing a mirror of the object above it. By now, the conversation had shifted from speculation to urgency. "We are beyond observation," one mission lead said at a closed-door briefing. "We're inside its field experiment." And that realization spread like a cold wind across the global scientific community. When the orbital window tightened to less than 1,000,000 kilometers, the entire geometry of Mars's sky changed. The faint violet ring bloomed into an electric curtain circling the planet's waistline. Probes in low orbit passed through shimmering arcs of charged dust that behaved like liquid glass, sliding over sensors in graceful sheets before dispersing. Even seasoned engineers found themselves staring at their screens, transfixed. Whatever 3i Atlas was doing, it was no longer subtle. The choreography had begun. In laboratories on Earth, models churned out timelines like breathless meteorologists tracking a storm. The data now indicated a full planetary lattice forming under the crust, as if Mars were becoming a resonator. To some scientists, the implication was obvious. Energy was being stored. Others countered that it looked more like a signal amplifier, a device to project something outward. Whichever theory proved correct, the physics being displayed dwarfed anything humanity had built. Then, a single, unambiguous event shattered the last of the skepticism. At 0317 UTC, seismometers on Phobos and Deimos recorded a pulse strong enough to alter their micro-orbits by measurable fractions of a meter. The moons of Mars had never moved like that before. Data analysts at the European Space Agency simply wrote "external forcing" in their log. Something had reached up and tapped Mars moons like beads on a string. Imagine standing in a concert hall as the orchestra warms up, each instrument finding its pitch. That was Mars and 3i Atlas now, a prelude to something larger. A low-frequency hum bled into the deep space network's dishes, not random noise but a rising glissando of prime intervals. Amateur operators on Earth caught it too, and soon social media feeds filled with spectrograms showing the same eerie staircase of frequencies. People began to call it the cosmic chord. Meanwhile, imagery from Mars orbiters revealed even more striking changes on the surface. The hexagonal patterns had deepened into trenches, and their edges glowed faintly blue. Dust devils, once random, now traced perfect circles before vanishing into thin air. Even the thin clouds above Olympus Mons began to rotate in a synchronized gyre, like the eye of a vast but invisible hurricane. Inside control rooms, the tone shifted from curiosity to crisis management. If it's charging something, we need to know when it discharges, one mission controller muttered. Another added, we may already be inside the experiment's field. No one had an answer to the unspoken question, should humanity intervene, and if so, how? Then came the light towers. From a dozen equatorial nodes, columns of pale plasma rose silently into the sky, climbing tens of kilometers before curling outward like the petals of a slow-motion flower. They did not flicker, they did not waver, they simply grew, faint but steady, forming a ring of luminous spires visible even in low-power backyard telescopes. The phenomenon was at once beautiful and unnerving, a planetary crown perhaps, or a set of launch pylons waiting for something unseen. Picture a row of tuning forks struck simultaneously, vibrating in perfect sympathy. That was the feeling of the spires. Sensors on orbiters reported surges of magnetism and temperature anomalies rising from the nodes. Dust on the surface danced in invisible currents, small pebbles levitating for seconds at a time before settling back. No natural process on Mars matched this choreography. As the towers stabilized, the crystalline object above Mars shifted again. Its once chaotic spin slowed to a stately rotation, each facet flashing in a sequence that looked deliberate, almost ceremonial. Spectrometers caught a brief but unmistakable spike of exotic elements streaming from its surface toward the towers. It was no longer just observing, it was feeding them. By now, even the most cautious scientists were calling it an apparatus. This is not an asteroid behaving oddly, one senior astronomer said off the record. It's a machine performing a program. The big question remained. A program to do what? And then, amid the mounting dread, came a quiet moment of clarity. A young postdoc comparing the frequency of the plasma columns to the heartbeat pulses recorded weeks earlier noticed a match. The towers were timed to the same prime intervals that had first appeared in the magnetic pulses. The entire system, object, planet, towers, and subsurface lattice, was playing one integrated score. We've been looking at snapshots, she told her supervisor. This is a piece of music. We're at the overture. Her voice trembled as she added, I don't know what comes next. With each passing hour, Mars looked less like a passive world and more like a living instrument tuned by a hand older than anything humanity had imagined. In that tuning lay a promise or a threat. No one could say which, and yet, across the world, millions watched the faint glow on their screens, drawn to the strange beauty unfolding just one planet away. By the third Martian sunrise after the towers appeared, the planet's thin sky was no longer still. Auroral sheets drifted down from the upper atmosphere, curling like translucent sails. Orbiters flying over the poles captured time-lapse footage of light pulses racing along the hexagonal trenches, converging on each tower before leaping skyward. It was as though the entire crust had become a circuit board and the towers were its glowing terminals. On Earth, observatories pointed everything they had at the spectacle. Even instruments designed for exoplanet spectroscopy were pressed into service. Data poured into supercomputers, filling petabytes with raw numbers. Yet no one could build a model that predicted the next step. Each new hour brought a small change no algorithm foresaw, the mark of an active system rather than a passive phenomenon. Then a new signal appeared. Deep space antennas on Earth began picking up pulses from the region around Mars, not in radio or light, but in the ultra-low frequencies associated with gravitational waves. At first, the amplitude was tiny, almost indistinguishable from background noise. But when the pulses were stacked and time-aligned, a shape emerged. A standing wave between Mars and 3I Atlas, as though the two were strumming space-time itself like the string of a harp. Picture a diver striking a tuning fork underwater and feeling the vibration echo through the whole sea. That was the solar system now, a resonance connecting Mars and the object, humming across millions of kilometers, bending the orbits of dust and rock in subtle ways. Small asteroids near the Lagrange points began to shift course ever so slightly, like iron filings realigning in a hidden magnetic field. Inside the planetary science community, a quiet schism formed. One camp argued they were witnessing the construction of a vast interstellar relay, a kind of cosmic antenna. The other feared it was the slow ignition of a planetary engine, a process designed to transform Mars from within. Both camps agreed on one point. Whatever was happening, it was deliberate. The plasma towers themselves began to change. Their once steady glow broke into bands, like the stripes of a giant lighthouse beam sweeping the sky. Instruments showed those bands carrying data, amplitude modulation, not random flicker. Each sweep aligned with a deep pulse from the planet's core, suggesting a handshake protocol between the towers and the object overhead. Amid the tension, a second, stranger phenomenon emerged. Instruments aboard ESA's orbiter picked up transient shapes flickering within the plasma columns, lattice-work silhouettes that formed for a second, then vanished. They looked like three-dimensional diagrams, or perhaps test patterns displayed in light. Screenshots of these ghost schematics leaked online, and within hours forums filled with speculation, blueprints, alien writing, or merely interference artifacts. Meanwhile, subtle changes appeared on Mars itself. At each node, the ground bulged upward by a few centimeters per hour. The bulges formed concentric rings like tree growth lines. High-resolution radar showed voids beneath them, as though chambers were being excavated by forces invisible to human eyes. Dust at the bulge's centers rose and fell with each pulse from above, a slow planetary breathing. Even the object's orbit shifted. Originally trailing Mars by a predictable arc, 3I Atlas began to oscillate ever so slightly, matching the frequencies of the towers. Its facets glowed in a soft, non-reflective light, as if the object itself were now active, not merely catching sunlight. Spectroscopy detected short-lived particles, exotic states of matter flaring and vanishing, streaming from its surface to Mars in needle-thin beams. Imagine two musicians across a vast hall, one plucking a string while the other sings the same note until the air between them vibrates. That was Mars and 3I Atlas now, weaving a duet in matter and energy. Observers on Earth could only watch the score unfold. Then came a development that rattled even the optimists. Several orbital probes began to register null zones, regions just above the towers where normal electromagnetic behavior collapsed. Signals dropped to zero, instruments recorded silence, photons passing through bent unpredictably, as though space itself was being folded or thinned. Some scientists whispered about nascent wormholes, others about phase transitions in the vacuum. No one could prove either, but the data were undeniable. By the end of the week, the entire system, object, towers, subsurface lattice, pulsed in a perfect rhythm. Prime intervals still dominated, but now overlaid with more complex harmonics. It was as though a simple melody had evolved into a symphony. Graphs showed fractal patterns repeating at multiple scales, echoing both atomic lattices and planetary orbits, and yet amid the fear, some felt awe. "It's not a weapon," one astrophysicist said quietly during a live stream. "It's an instrument. We're witnessing a performance older than our species." Her words went viral, feeding both fascination and dread. With each passing hour, the alignment approached its theoretical peak, a moment when Mars, 3I, Atlas, and the Sun would form a near-perfect triangle in space. No one knew what would happen then. The countdown, if that's what it was would soon end. And somewhere inside that braided light above Mars, an answer waited. The first sign that the alignment was about to reach its climax came not from Mars itself, but from the empty space between the planets. Telescopes trained on the corridor stretching from Mars to the outer solar system began to register faint points of light. Tiny, symmetric flickers arranged in spirals, as though invisible seeds were blooming in the vacuum. At first dismissed as cosmic rays or background noise, their number and precision quickly defied coincidence. Something was growing outward from Mars, invisible but measurable, like the ghost of a bridge to nowhere. Mission control centers went silent except for the hum of servers. Analysts stared at the evolving plots, the flickers forming fractals larger than Earth's orbit. They weren't particles, they weren't spacecraft. They were distortions in space-time itself, faint lensing effects bending the star field into repeating motifs. One observer whispered, "It's like the universe is being tessellated." Another muttered, "We're watching it draw an interface." Meanwhile, on Mars, the bulges beneath each node cracked open. High-resolution radar showed narrow shafts plunging toward the core. Dust swirled upward, feeding into the plasma towers like smoke sucked into chimneys. The towers brightened to a white so intense that orbiters' cameras adjusted automatically, their sensors near saturation. It was no longer a violet glow. It was the colorless brilliance of an arc welder. Imagine standing under a suspension bridge as its cables tighten and vibrate, feeling the pull in your chest. That was the solar system now. Every magnetometer from Earth to Saturn recorded the same faint pulse, a harmonic tremor threading through space. Even the sun's corona showed a subtle ripple at the same frequency, an impossible resonance as if the star itself were listening. Then came the sudden silence. The towers went dark, the hum ceased, and Mars looked for a heartbeat, like the old familiar world again. Instruments flatlined, spacecraft telemetry dropped to zero as though the entire system had powered off. Scientists leaned back from their consoles, unsure whether to breathe relief or dread. "Did it finish?" someone asked, but the silence was only the inhale before the exhale. A moment later, every sensor spiked off the charts. Light poured upward from the shafts, racing into the towers, then leaping skyward in concentric beams. This time the beams didn't stop at low orbit. They reached far beyond, converging on the spiral flickers between Mars and the void. The invisible seeds lit up like nodes on a neural network, forming a three-dimensional map that encompassed half the solar system. Across Earth, amateur telescopes captured faint lines arcing across the sky, ghostly filaments connecting Mars to distant points. Social media flooded with grainy images of spiderweb geometries etched against the stars. The lines were not random. They traced a geometry older than any human language. Prime ratios, nested spirals, mirrored hexagons. A design repeated from the scale of atoms to the scale of galaxies. Inside mission control, someone noticed a new anomaly. Deep space antennas were receiving packets of data, pulses modulated with digital clarity. The content was indecipherable, but its structure was unmistakably intentional. Headers, checksums, error correction, the hallmarks of engineered communication. "It's transmitting," a technician breathed. But to where? Simultaneously, Mars itself began to cool. Infrared readings dropped sharply at the equator, even as the poles warmed. It was as though heat were being redistributed internally or drained into another dimension. Crustal strain increased but remained perfectly symmetric. No quakes, no fissures. "Controlled energy release," someone muttered, like a processor throttling itself. Then the crystalline object moved. For the first time since its arrival, it descended, slowly, with deliberate precision, toward the largest tower. Its facets pulsed in time with the beams, and for a moment its mirror-black core opened, revealing a depthless void that swallowed light. Orbiters captured only fragments before their sensors overloaded. It wasn't a landing, it was docking. Picture two halves of a lock clicking into place, gears aligning after years of waiting. That was the moment above Mars. The object and the towers merged into a single silhouette, a column of light stabbing out into the void, bright enough to cast shadows on Phobos. Magnetometers across the solar system convulsed. The hum returned, deeper now, subsonic, felt rather than heard. As this fusion occurred, the spiral flickers beyond Mars snapped into a rigid grid. It was no longer a diffuse web, but a corridor, a straight, radiant path extending toward the outer darkness. At its farthest edge, telescopes detected a faint shimmer, like the outline of an immense door beginning to open. On Earth, sleep-deprived scientists stared at their monitors, feeling like they were looking at the back end of a cosmic experiment that had finally reached its true purpose. None could say what would step through that corridor or what Mars had become, but everyone knew, instinctively, that the quiet red planet was now a gateway, and 3I Atlas was its key. As the corridor stabilized, a hush settled over the entire astronomical community. For decades, the solar system had been mapped down to pebbles, yet nothing like this had ever emerged from its quiet clockwork. Now, in the span of hours, Mars had become a lighthouse aimed into interstellar night. The faint shimmer at the corridor's far end expanded, revealing not an object but a distortion, like heat haze magnified to cosmic scale, folding the star field into curved ribbons. Every probe near Mars recorded a sudden drop in cosmic background noise. Static vanished. Magnetic field lines twisted inward toward the corridor, as though the void itself were drawing breath. Even the solar wind slowed fractionally at Mars' orbit. Astronomers watching live streams described a strange vertigo, like standing at the edge of a cliff where gravity tilts toward the abyss. Inside mission control, murmurs turned to gasps. A new signal had appeared, ultra-stable, pulsing at the same prime number intervals, but now carrying harmonics that mapped perfectly to the corridor's geometry. When fed into visualizers, the signal drew a spiral collapsing into a dot, then expanding outward as a nested flower. One analyst whispered, "It's telling us the door is opening." Then came the light surge. The plasma towers brightened to a glare that forced cameras into safety mode. The object above Mars unfolded like a mechanical blossom, each facet tilting outward to form a ring. From the ring's center rose a shaft of darkness, a pillar, not of light, but of absence, as if someone had cut a column out of space itself. Around it, auroral ribbons snapped and flared, forming rotating arcs that looked more alive than physical. Imagine striking a bell so hard it rings not just sound, but geometry. That was Mars now. The corridor extended farther, stabilizing into a straight, luminous tunnel hundreds of millions of kilometers long. Telescopes at the edge of the system picked up gravitational anomalies as distant comets shifted by micrometers in perfect sync. Something immense was exerting influence across a volume the size of a small star system. Meanwhile, Mars itself continued to transform. The trenches, once faintly glowing, now ran with liquid light, molten but perfectly contained. Radar showed cavities beneath the surface swelling into vast chambers, their ceilings smooth as domes, as though they had been sculpted from within. At each node, the ground trembled in a low-frequency rhythm, but never enough to crack. Whatever was happening was controlled to an almost surgical degree. The object's facets now flickered with new colors, golds, emeralds, even colors cameras flagged as out of gamut, shades our eyes had never evolved to see. Spectrographs recorded impossible absorption lines hinting at physics far beyond our textbooks. "It's not just operating," a scientist muttered into her microphone. It's teaching space new rules. Then, for the first time, the corridor pulsed outward instead of inward. Telescopes caught the faint outline of an enormous shape moving on the far side, not crossing into our system, but pressing against the boundary like a fingertip testing the surface of water. Its outline defied description. Not solid, not gas, but a lattice of brightness shifting through fractal configurations. The corridor's light dimmed slightly, as if straining to hold the contact. Inside control rooms, people stopped talking altogether. The only sound was the low hum of air conditioning and the faint static from speakers as instruments recorded the incomprehensible. Some scientists felt their throats tighten, a reflex older than language. Others leaned forward, eyes wide, hunger for knowledge overpowering fear. All of them knew they were watching the edge of a revelation humanity wasn't prepared for. Picture staring at a cathedral door as it swings open onto a void so vast your mind loses scale. That was the view through the corridor now, a yawning brightness flickering with nested polyhedra. Data analysts whispered numbers into headsets. Gravitational flux, radiation spectrum, energy densities, orders of magnitude above solar output. Yet Mars remained stable, its towers glowing like frozen lightning, its subsurface lattice pulsing like a heartbeat. And then, abruptly, the signals stopped climbing. Everything froze. Towers steady, corridor bright, the shape beyond holding still. It was like a held breath at the end of a long note. "It's waiting," someone whispered. "It's waiting for something." At that moment, one of the ESA orbiters picked up a tiny but deliberate data packet embedded in the hum, a repeating phrase of binary pulses bookended by silence. Decoding yielded nothing intelligible, but the packet's checksum was unmistakably artificial. It wasn't random noise, it was an invitation, or perhaps a handshake. Across Earth, public speculation reached fever pitch. Some saw salvation, others annihilation. The most sober voices urged patience. "We've just opened a letter written eons ago," one scientist said in a rare interview. "It's not going to reveal itself all at once." But everyone sensed the same thing. The experiment had reached its threshold. Whatever 3i Atlas had been doing all these months, probing, pulsing, carving, building, was about to give way to the next phase. Mars, once a dead world, now glowed like a tuned instrument. And somewhere beyond that luminous corridor, a hand waited poised above the first key of an unimaginable scale. At first, the shape beyond the corridor did not move. It hovered like an unfinished idea pressing against the skin of reality. Telescopes on every continent strained to capture details but saw only shifting fractals, like snowflakes magnified 1,000,000,000,000 times. Yet hidden within those changing patterns were regularities, angles, ratios, and symmetries echoing the lattice under Mars's crust. It was as if the thing beyond had sent its blueprint ahead and now stood poised to claim it. Inside mission control, analysts began running predictive models, each more unnerving than the last. If the geometry held, the corridor was not just a path but a resonator, amplifying the incoming object's presence across time and space. "Think of a trumpet," one scientist said quietly. "The mouthpiece is out there. The bell is here." Another muttered, "We're sitting inside the bell." Then came a new tremor on Mars, subtle but synchronized across all nodes. It wasn't seismic but electromagnetic, a sweeping charge that flickered across the trenches and towers in a perfect cascade. Orbiters recorded plumes of dust rising from fissures, forming transient figures like ghostly pillars before dispersing. Some of these figures appeared to rotate, casting shadows impossible under the thin Martian sun. To skeptics, it was turbulence. To believers, it was the first glimpse of whatever waited beyond. Imagine standing at the edge of a vast cave and hearing an echo of footsteps before the person arrives. That was the signal now coming from the corridor. Each pulse built on the last, harmonics multiplying until the graphs became unreadable. Amateur radio operators worldwide reported low-frequency rumbles creeping into their receivers. Even satellites in Earth orbit picked up faint fluctuations in their gyroscopes, as though the entire solar system were being tuned. The towers responded by tilting. One by one, their plasma beams curved outward, converging on a single point above the equator. There, they fused into a massive column of pale light, wide enough to engulf a city, the crystalline object now a ring of facets rather than a closed polyhedron, aligned with the column, its inner void swirling like a slow whirlpool. For the first time, observers saw streaks of matter streaming upward from Mars itself, vanishing into the object's core as though the planet were feeding it. Spectrographs went wild. Elements rare, even in supernova remnants, flickered in the beams. Rhenium, iridium, traces of exotic isotopes thought to decay instantly under normal conditions. Yet here they persisted, carried upward in a silent torrent. "We're watching it rewrite chemistry," one stunned chemist whispered. Meanwhile, the corridor beyond Mars widened, its edges glowing with a rainbow sheen like oil on water. Nested inside were polyhedral frames spinning in slow counter-rotation, each larger than the last. They looked less like a ship and more like a scaffold for something yet unseen, a gate built not to admit a visitor, but to project something outward. At ESA headquarters, a young analyst tried a risky experiment, feeding the corridor's frequency data into an audio synthesizer. The resulting sound was not a hum, but a chord, a deep layered resonance that rose and fell like breathing. "It's singing," she said to no one in particular. "It's singing through space." Back on Mars, subtle changes hinted at final preparation. The hexagonal trenches began to glow from beneath, lighting the surface like the veins of a leaf. Dust devils formed and dissolved with metronomic precision, like pistons pumping air through a colossal instrument. High-resolution radar found that the cavities beneath the nodes had connected, forming a vast, hollow structure spanning half the planet. The scale of engineering defied human comprehension. Picture holding a seashell to your ear and hearing not the ocean but the turning of the cosmos. That was the feeling creeping into control rooms. Scientists stared at data streams, aware that something immense and deliberate was about to happen, yet powerless to influence it. Then, at 00419 UTC, the corridor pulsed bright enough to be seen with the naked eye from Earth's night side. News outlets carried live footage of a faint vertical line rising above the red dot of Mars, shimmering like a cosmic beacon. Social media flooded with grainy smartphone shots and breathless captions. The public, long fascinated but skeptical, now saw with their own eyes that something unprecedented was unfolding. Inside mission control, silence deepened. The object's ring facets flickered in a countdown-like sequence, each panel extinguishing then reigniting in rapid progression. The plasma column from Mars narrowed, focused, and finally inverted, pulling not outward but inward, as though drawing in space itself. For a heartbeat, instruments recorded negative energy densities, a concept previously confined to theoretical physics. And then everything stopped moving. Towers, trenches, object, corridor, frozen in an impossible tableau. The only motion was the shimmer at the corridor's far end, now spinning like a vortex. Analysts whispered to each other, afraid to break the spell. "It's aligning," someone said. "This is the key turning." At that moment, a new signal arrived, faint but undeniable. A simple pulse followed by a pause, then another pulse at half the interval. Not prime numbers this time, but a binary pattern. On, off, like a heartbeat reversed. Instruments confirmed it was emanating from both the corridor and Mars simultaneously. Whatever lay beyond was not just approaching, it was synchronized, waiting for the last note to play. The binary pulses quickened until they blurred into a single tremor, threading through every instrument pointed at Mars. Space around the planet appeared to shimmer in a way no telescope calibration could explain, like the edge of a mirage magnified 1,000,000 times. The towers no longer shone steadily, but rippled, bending back and forth as though under the pull of invisible tides. Even the faint pinkish haze of Mars' atmosphere pulsed like a living membrane. Then, as suddenly as it began, the pulses ceased. A moment of stillness stretched long enough for engineers to glance at one another. Mars glowed like an ember cooling at its edges, yet the corridor beyond widened to twice its diameter, its interior now a tunnel of braided light coiling into darkness. High-speed footage revealed microstructures forming and dissolving inside the tunnel, triangles, hexagons, and loops that repeated across scales. It looked less like a gate and more like a living algorithm building itself in three-dimensional space. Inside Mission Control, a low voice muttered, "It's a handshake protocol." Another replied, "No, it's a boot sequence." But before the debate could continue, the object above Mars began to descend again. Its ring facets collapsed inward, shaping into a tall, hollow spire. At the spire's tip glowed a black droplet, perfectly spherical, refusing to reflect or absorb light, as if it were a hole cut in reality. Imagine staring at a thunderstorm's anvil cloud moments before lightning strikes. That was the atmosphere above Mars now, charged, shimmering, waiting. The black droplet detached and drifted downward, sliding through the spire like a bead on a string until it hovered just above the plasma towers. Every instrument in orbit registered a sudden mass anomaly at its location, equivalent to a small moon compressed into a point. Yet gravitational readings around it remained normal, as though its mass were hidden from space itself. On the planet below, changes accelerated. The hexagonal trenches glowed white-hot and began extruding pillars of crystalline material, growing like coral from the ground. These pillars were hollow, their interiors lined with unknown lattices that resonated at the same frequency as the corridor. In under an hour, dozens of these pillars reached several hundred meters tall, all pointing toward the black droplet above. To the watching scientists, it looked like a planetary array lifting its arms to receive a signal. Then came the voice. Not sound, but a pattern of oscillations recorded simultaneously by every sensor tuned to the corridor's frequency. It wasn't words, but structured pulses, rising and falling like syllables. Analysts poured the data into visualization software and watched a swirling spiral emerge, a shape echoing both DNA and galactic arms. Someone whispered, "It's introducing itself." Back on Earth, the news broke across every network. Even outlets that had mocked the phenomenon now streamed the footage live. The corridor blazing across the sky, the spire, the droplet, the pillars sprouting from Mars. Commentators invoked everything from ancient myths to quantum gateways. But the scientists remained focused on the numbers, their faces lit by shifting graphs. The droplet began to descend further. As it neared the surface, the crystalline pillars bent slightly inward, forming a ring around its path. Plasma from the towers curled toward it, merging into filaments that spun faster and faster. Magnetometers recorded fields stronger than Jupiter's but localized to a narrow cone above the planet. "It's focusing," said one physicist. "Something is about to emerge or enter." Picture a lock finally aligning its tumblers after years of being frozen. That was the sensation rippling across every observatory. Even animals on Earth seemed to react. Reports of migratory birds flying erratically, whales singing in unusual patterns. Whether coincidence or cosmic influence, it added to the sense of living inside a drumhead being struck from another dimension. At 06:07 UTC, The droplet touched the surface of Mars at the center of the largest node. There was no explosion, no shockwave. Instead, the ground beneath it became translucent, revealing a glowing lattice extending deep into the planet. The droplet sank slowly through the crust, like ink through water, leaving behind a perfect circle of fused glass. As it disappeared, the plasma towers dimmed but did not shut down. Their glow steadied into a low, resonant hum. Then, above Mars, the object emitted a final pulse. This time it wasn't prime numbers or binary. It was a long, rising tone punctuated by brief silences, like a deep breath before speech. The corridor's far end rippled in response, and telescopes recorded a vast shadow stirring beyond, a shape so large it blotted out stars in a pattern of tessellated darkness. Inside Mission Control, people stared at their monitors as data poured in faster than they could pass. Some clutched their headphones, others simply closed their eyes. Everyone sensed the same thing. The overture was over. Whatever had been orchestrated between Mars and 3i Atlas had reached its true purpose, and the first note of the main event was about to sound. For several minutes after the droplet disappeared beneath the crust, Mars held its breath. The towers stood motionless, the plasma streams faint and steady like candle flames before a storm. Instruments on orbiters recorded a profound stillness, an eerie null where the planet's usual whisper of seismic and magnetic noise vanished. Then, without warning, a pulse surged outward from the core, a slow rolling wave that rippled through the crust and into space, bending light and magnetism as it traveled. It was not an explosion but a heartbeat, and it carried data. Across Earth, spectrograms lit up with the pulse. Analysts realized it was a perfect inversion of the original prime number sequences. The same pattern played backwards, like a song rewound to its opening note. "It's closed the loop," murmured one scientist. "We're inside the second act now." Inside Mars, changes accelerated beyond anything yet seen. The trenches flashed like strobe lights, then flooded with a glowing substance resembling liquid glass. The crystalline pillars extruded further, linking into vast arcs that spanned kilometers, forming domes over the nodes. High-resolution radar revealed cavities merging into a single enormous hollow stretching under the equator, a chamber larger than Earth's Grand Canyon, but perfectly symmetrical. Picture watching frost form on a window pane in fast motion, curling patterns weaving themselves with invisible intent. That was the surface of Mars now. Small whirlwinds traced sigils into dust, then settled. Clouds above the equator formed concentric rings visible from orbit. The planet was no longer a backdrop. It had become a living diagram. Meanwhile, the corridor beyond Mars expanded again. Its braided light unraveled into dozens of filaments, each pointing toward a different sector of space like the spokes of an immense wheel. The shape beyond, still half concealed, pressed closer, distorting the star field more violently. Telescopes picked up gravitational lensing so strong entire constellations warped around its outline. Whatever stood on the far side was incomprehensibly massive. Then came the first glimpse. Through a lucky angle, an ESA orbiter caught a momentary stabilization of the far field, enough to produce a coherent image. Not a single object, but a lattice of rotating arcs arranged like petals of a flower, kilometers thick, glowing faintly as though lit from within. The image lasted less than a second before dissolving, but it was enough. "We're not seeing a ship," said one analyst. "We're seeing the opening of a structure." The plasma towers responded in kind. Their glow shifted from white to a deep cobalt, pulses running up and down like data packets in fiber optic cables. Magnetometers recorded a doubling of field strength, enough to push some orbiters into higher trajectories. On Earth, amateur astronomers cheered as the auroral halo around Mars brightened to a visible ring, luminous enough to cast a shadow on the Martian surface. Amid the awe came fear. Models now predicted that energy stored under Mars exceeded the combined output of every power plant on Earth for a century. If it discharges, one physicist whispered, it could vaporize half the planet. But others argued the process looked too controlled for a weapon. "This is orchestration," countered another. "It's building to a crescendo, not a detonation." Then, in a move no one foresaw, the crystalline object above Mars began to disassemble. Facets detached like leaves drifting from a stem, each spinning outward to hover over a plasma tower. The ring became a halo of individual shards, each aligned to a tower beneath. Data streams showed intense information exchange between shard and tower, a handshake repeated across the entire network. Imagine a conductor stepping back as the orchestra takes over, every section playing its part without the baton. That was Mars now. The shards pulsed in counterpoint to the towers, and the corridor beyond flared with a sudden burst of colour. Not just violet and blue, but hues outside the visible spectrum, captured only by specialized sensors. Inside control rooms, scientists realized they were watching a handoff. "The object was the seed," one said. "Mars is now the instrument." If true, then the planet itself had become the engine of whatever was about to happen. As the shards completed their alignment, the corridor's far end began to stabilize. No longer a flickering haze, it now resembled a colossal aperture framed by interlocking polyhedra. Within its depths, points of light moved like distant cities glimpsed through a tunnel. Telescopes caught parallax shifts suggesting enormous distances compressed into a narrow field. "We're not looking out there," one analyst whispered. "We're looking somewhere else entirely." And then the planet spoke again. A second pulse erupted from the core, but this time it carried a rising harmonic, like a question pitched into the void. The corridor responded with a descending tone, a perfect answer. Around the world, people watching live streams heard only silence but saw graphs spike and dance. Even without sound, the pattern was unmistakable, a dialogue across a gulf of light years. The towers brightened to their maximum yet, casting deep shadows across the Martian terrain. The shards above glowed like tiny suns, their beams intersecting to form a single luminous dome over the equator. Within the dome, space itself appeared to ripple inward, a funnel of distorted starlight reaching down into the planet's core. Picture the surface of a lake drawing downward into a whirlpool, water and air merging into a single spiraling throat. That was the image now filling every screen on Earth. The corridor beyond flickered, and the shape pressing against it seemed to lean closer, its edges sharpening. Humanity, still reeling from months of revelation, now watched the threshold of a possible arrival. For a long heartbeat, the system held steady. The shards above Mars floated like a halo of frozen lightning, the plasma towers burning cobalt, the corridor shimmering with impossible geometry. From Earth's night side, the whole tableau resembled a glowing keyhole set in the dark of space, a small red planet becoming the fulcrum of a cosmic machine. Then a tremor rippled across the solar wind. Instruments on multiple spacecraft picked up a sudden drop in proton flux, as if something were shielding Mars and the corridor from the sun. The faint background hiss of charged particles vanished. "It's created a bubble," one space weather scientist whispered, "a magnetosphere on demand." Within this newly silent sphere, the corridor's inner walls began to change color, no longer braided light, but translucent, like a tunnel of crystal ice refracting alien constellations. Inside mission control, the tension deepened. The dialogue between Mars and the corridor had stabilized into a complex braid of pulses, rising and falling with clock-like precision. Analysts noticed new harmonics layered atop the original patterns, a second language nested within the first. When plotted in 3D, the data formed double helixes spiraling through time. "It's negotiating," someone muttered, "or calibrating." Meanwhile, Mars itself underwent further metamorphosis. The domes at each node fused into a single continuous shell of crystal, sealing the trenches beneath. Seismic sensors reported the crust flexing like a drumhead, bowing inward and then outward with each pulse. Yet the planet remained intact, the forces acting with perfect symmetry. Even the thin air above Olympus Mons had begun to glow faintly green, hinting at chemical reactions unknown to terrestrial science. Picture a vast musical instrument being tuned string by string, every peg turning until the whole resonates as one. That was Mars now, and the corridor was no longer a passive tunnel. Its inner walls flickered with shapes like pages turning, each shape dissolving into the next. In one frame, a star field, in another, a molecular diagram, then a spiral galaxy seen from above, as if the tunnel were showing a library of concepts instead of scenery. Then came the first outward wave. Without warning, beams of pale light shot from the shards above Mars toward the corridor's far end. The beams did not scatter, but vanished at the aperture, as though being absorbed. Instruments detected simultaneous spikes in gravitational lensing at the far end, a widening of the aperture itself, as if the door were being pried open from both sides. On Earth, public speculation exploded. News anchors spoke of wormholes, teleportation, dimensional gateways. Social media teemed with amateur analyses and conspiracy theories. But the scientists focused on the numbers. Energy levels rising, resonance intervals shortening, and a new low-frequency vibration pulsing through the entire solar system. Some satellites near Earth began to drift slightly off course, their gyroscopes detecting an invisible tug. Then Mars sent a third pulse, not a question this time, but a chord, layered and resonant, lasting for almost a full minute. The corridor answered with a shimmer so bright it outshone every star in the field. Cameras struggled to adjust. Inside the shimmer, a silhouette formed, tall, curved structures unfolding like petals, each kilometers high, rotating slowly. This time the image persisted for more than a heartbeat. It looked less like a ship and more like a cathedral built of light. Imagine watching a lighthouse beam sweep across fog, revealing for an instant the outlines of a colossal hidden harbour. That was the view now. The aperture at the far end expanded, its edges twisting outward until the shape beyond appeared to be stepping forward or projecting inward into our system. Inside Mission Control, a young astrophysicist whispered what many were thinking. It's not coming to us. We're being invited in. The corridor's geometry suggested a one-way passage from Mars outward, not an inbound path. Yet the energy signatures implied a bidirectional link, a door that could open either way. As this realization settled, the shards above Mars began to drift apart, their beams crossing in complex lattices. For a moment, every node on Mars, every tower and every shard pulsed in perfect synchrony, then dimmed to a low glow. Instruments picked up a faint but deliberate data burst, encoded in a base different from binary, a ternary system of pulses like three notes struck together. Decoding efforts began immediately, but no one understood the language. Then the unexpected happened. The surface of Mars at the center of the equatorial lattice cracked open, revealing a circular chasm glowing with blue-white light. Dust streamed upward in a slow spiral, vanishing into the chasm. Magnetometers on orbiters maxed out as the field inverted. It was as though the planet itself had opened an eye. The corridor's far end pulsed in response, the aperture blooming wider. Around the world, people stared at their screens, sensing that the long overture of months was reaching its crescendo. Whatever three-eye atlas had seeded, probed, or awakened was no longer theoretical. Mars was now a functional component of a mechanism whose true scale lay beyond sight. Picture a key turning in a lock so large it spans the sky, tumblers aligning with a sound like distant thunder. That was the moment above Mars now, the sense of something immense about to click into place. The chasm at Mars' equator widened until it swallowed the center of the lattice. From orbit, it resembled a perfect circle of molten sapphire framed by the hexagonal grid, a planetary iris staring into space. Around it, the crystalline towers leaned slightly inward, their plasma beams now flowing downward instead of up, as if feeding the opening. The shards above Mars drifted into a spiral configuration, tracing a helix around the planet, their combined glow casting long shadows across the Martian surface. Inside Mission Control, data flooded in. Magnetometers recorded field strengths rivaling Jupiter's magnetosphere but confined to a narrow cone. Gravimeters on orbiters measured subtle drops in apparent mass near the chasm, as though space itself were being thinned. "We're seeing a local change in space-time curvature," one physicist whispered. "Mars is no longer fully in our universe." Meanwhile, the corridor beyond the planet blossomed into a tunnel of nested polyhedra spinning at different rates. Inside each frame, images flickered, star clusters, nebulae, and geometric patterns no one could identify. It was as if the tunnel were rotating through an interstellar library, each flicker a different destination or dataset. "It's indexing," said an analyst, choosing where to connect. Picture scrolling through a cosmic address book, each entry a star system waiting beyond the veil. That was the corridor now, and the aperture at its far end had ceased flickering. It had stabilized into a single glowing circle, inside of which spun a vast, faintly luminous lattice that dwarfed Mars itself. Some telescopes suggested it was not a single structure but a gateway to an immense region of space folded into a thin slice of reality. Then came the first outbound surge. From the chasm at Mars' equator erupted a column of light thicker than Olympus Mons, racing upward to merge with the spiral of shards. The shards pulsed once, then projected a lattice of beams straight into the corridor. Instruments showed data streams encoded in the beams, but also something stranger. Entangled particles arriving at Earth-based detectors simultaneously, as though Mars and the corridor had bypassed the light speed limit. For a moment, humanity's entire scientific apparatus quivered. Neutrino observatories registered impossible bursts. Gravitational wave detectors saw chirps unrelated to any black hole or neutron star merger. The whole solar system seemed to hum with a resonance older than planets, older than stars. The towers on Mars began to fold inward, their plasma funnels retracting like the petals of a closing flower. In their place rose a single colossal spire, crystalline and multifaceted, its peak piercing the thin atmosphere. At its tip glowed another black droplet, larger than the first, rotating slowly. It was no longer a seed, but a beacon, a fulcrum balancing two worlds. Imagine standing beneath a cathedral dome as the ceiling peels away to reveal the sky, only the sky is another universe. That was the feeling in control rooms. Screens showed the corridor's far end, now filled with shimmering shapes, like city skylines glimpsed through mist, but the scale defied imagination. Each building could be larger than Earth. Then the pulse came, a deep, bone-vibrating tone rolling across every detector on Earth. It lasted just 5 seconds, but left instruments ringing with harmonics for minutes afterward. This time, the pattern was unmistakably intentional. A ternary chord repeated 3 times, then silence. "That's not a broadcast," murmured one scientist. "That's a doorbell." The corridor responded with a cascading glow, each nested polyhedron rotating faster, locking into alignment with the spiral of shards around Mars. Lines of light traced across space between the two, forming a grid that shimmered like a spiderweb caught in sunlight. The black droplet at the spire's tip pulsed in sync with the grid, then emitted a thin beam directly into the corridor's heart. On Earth, public reaction swung from awe to panic. Some saw the gateway as a promise of interstellar contact, others as an existential threat. Livestream chats filled with speculation, prayers and memes. Yet amid the noise, a strange calm settled over the scientific community. "We're beyond first contact," said one senior astronomer. "This is integration." Mars itself began to change hue. The rusty reds and ochres gave way to iridescent blues and greens, as though a thin film of alien chemistry had swept across the surface. Radar detected the subsurface chamber expanding yet again, now stretching nearly pole to pole. The planet was hollowing itself, becoming lighter, its mass redistributed in ways no natural process could achieve. Picture a chrysalis darkening before the butterfly emerges. That was Mars now, a planet on the verge of metamorphosis, and above it, the shards and corridor danced in tandem, weaving a pattern no human could decode. Finally, the black droplet emitted a single pulse, bright enough to cast shadows on Earth's moon. At the far end of the corridor, the shimmering shapes paused, then began to rotate inward, collapsing like petals closing. The aperture pulsed once, twice, then settled into a deep, steady glow. Inside mission control, people whispered, but no one dared speak loudly. They all sensed it. The threshold was about to be crossed. Whether something would emerge into our system or Mars itself would depart for another realm, no one could guess. But after months of subtlety and escalation, the machine built from planet and object had reached its moment of truth. The glow from Mars now rivaled the sun's reflection off its ice caps. Through high-powered telescopes, the planet's once familiar red surface appeared as a shifting kaleidoscope of blues, silvers, and pale emeralds. The great spire at the equator shone like a lighthouse, its black droplet pulsing at intervals so regular they could have been clock ticks. Each pulse echoed in the corridor's nested polyhedra, triggering waves of light that rolled outward like concentric ripples on a pond. Inside mission control, a strange quiet settled over the room. Engineers, astrophysicists, and analysts leaned in as if eavesdropping on a private conversation. On their screens, data scrolled faster than it could be processed, yet the patterns were clear enough to read by eye. An escalation towards symmetry so perfect it bordered on the uncanny. "It's not random," someone whispered. "It's orchestration." Meanwhile, the corridor itself underwent its most dramatic shift yet. The braided tunnel elongated, its inner walls smoothing into a single seamless surface flecked with slow-moving sparks. These sparks began to arrange themselves into vast symbols, spirals, arcs, nested triangles, each visible for seconds before dissolving. "They're instructions," speculated one analyst, "or maybe coordinates." A colleague countered, "Could be a test pattern, could be showing off." Picture standing in an ancient cathedral as sunlight pours through stained glass, projecting moving shapes onto the stone floor. That was the corridor now, a gallery of living glyphs stretching across millions of kilometers. And at the far end, the lattice of light solidified into an unmistakable outline, a vast archway framed by pillars of rotating energy, its scale so immense it dwarfed Mars's orbit. Then came the first material exchange. For months, matter had streamed from Mars into the towers, but now filaments of pale vapor emerged from the corridor itself, drifting inward toward the black droplet at the spire's peak. Instruments detected exotic particles with half-lives too short to exist in normal conditions, yet here they streamed steadily, as if stabilized by the corridor's physics. It was a handshake, not of signals, but of substance. On Mars, the transformation deepened, the crust at the equator lifted by several meters, forming concentric terraces around the spire. The thin atmosphere thickened visibly, its density doubling in hours. Sensors recorded oxygen traces where none had been before, along with unidentified noble gases. "Terraforming," murmured one scientist, "or test atmosphere." As these changes unfolded, the shards orbiting Mars drifted into a new configuration, forming a vast rotating ring above the planet's equator. Each shard emitted a beam downward, the beams intersecting at the spire's tip to form a hovering sphere of white light. Spectrometers failed to identify its spectrum. It was as though the sphere emitted every wavelength at once. Imagine watching a cocoon split as the first hints of wings push against its shell. That was the feeling gripping every observer. The corridor's far end now pulsed in sync with the sphere above Mars, each pulse producing a faint distortion in nearby space. Even Earth-based instruments felt the tug, registering micro-deviations in satellite orbits and compass bearings. Then the black droplet at the spire's peak dissolved into the sphere, which expanded rapidly before contracting into a thin filament of light connecting Mars directly to the corridor's aperture. This filament pulsed like a heartbeat, sending a visible ripple down its length. Amateur astronomers captured the sight, a glowing umbilical stretching from Mars into the void, flickering with unknown colors. Inside Mission Control, debate reached fever pitch. "It's a launch tether," someone argued. "It's extracting Mars." Another countered, "It's sending something through." A third whispered, "It's building a bridge for us." Meanwhile, a soft but pervasive low-frequency hum spread through every deep space antenna tuned to the event. When converted to audio, it produced a deep, resonant chord followed by a higher tone, like a question and answer. Analysts noticed the sequence mirrored the early prime pulses, but woven into a more complex rhythm. "They've moved from numbers to language," someone said. Then came the first visual anomaly on Earth itself. In several dark sky locations, people reported faint ripples in the starfield overhead, as though distant constellations were being refracted by an invisible lens. Some mistook it for aurora, but instruments confirmed no solar storm. The effect lasted only minutes, but left behind a lingering sense of connection, as if whatever was happening near Mars had begun to brush against our own gravity well. Picture two oceans touching at their edges, a thin seam where currents mingle. That was the corridor now, no longer confined to Mars, but reaching outward, its influence spilling across interplanetary space. And at its heart, the archway at the far end brightened, revealing glimpses of structures so vast and complex they defied all reference, loops of light, rotating planes, and shadowy forms hinting at colossal movement beyond. Finally, the sphere above Mars emitted a single piercing flash. Instruments maxed out. For a moment, the entire corridor glowed as bright as a second sun. When the light faded, the corridor's far end no longer appeared distant. It appeared adjacent, as though space itself had folded and now placed another region of the universe within arm's reach. Inside Mission Control, no one spoke. On their screens, Mars floated unchanged, yet every instrument screamed of a fundamental shift. "It's here," someone whispered. "It's touching our space." The moment space folded, every graph on every screen shifted at once. Distances recalculated, constants blurred. Spacecraft orbiting Mars recorded their altitudes shrinking by centimeters without firing thrusters, as if the space between had thinned. A subtle pressure pressed outward from the corridor, not as force, but as a redefinition of location. "We're not moving," whispered one analyst. "Space is moving around us." Inside the corridor, the archway now looked less like a window and more like a mouth. Through its shimmering aperture spilled a slow cascade of pale matter, not gas, not dust, but something that coalesced into thread-like structures before dissolving. The threads spiraled toward Mars, twisting around the filament connecting the planet to the corridor. When they touched the filament, they flared like hot metal dipped in water, leaving behind shimmering motes that drifted downward into Mars' atmosphere. On the surface, changes accelerated. The equatorial terraces surrounding the spire liquefied into a reflective sea, mirroring the sky like polished obsidian. Crystalline pillars rose from the sea, arranging themselves in concentric arcs, then sank beneath the surface as if planting seeds. High-resolution radar showed these seeds extending deep into the crust, linking with the vast subsurface chamber. "It's not just building up," murmured one geologist. "It's building down." Picture a nerve growing toward its counterpart, seeking a synapse. That was Mars now, reaching through the corridor toward whatever lay beyond. The shard ring above the planet began to rotate counterclockwise, accelerating until it formed a solid-looking halo. Each shard emitted a beam that flicked across the corridor's aperture like scanning lines on an old cathode ray screen. Then came the first measurable transfer of energy outward. Instruments on Earth detected a sudden uptick in neutrino flux and gravitational wave amplitude in a direction matching the corridor's far end. It was as if Mars had opened a pipeline not for matter, but for information encoded in fundamental particles. Even timekeeping at the world's most precise atomic clocks jittered by trillionths of a second, enough to suggest space-time itself was being rewritten in microscopic pulses. Meanwhile, telescopes trained on the corridor's far end glimpsed shapes shifting in synchrony with Mars' pulses. For an instant, an enormous silhouette appeared, a nested ring system turning slowly, its inner spokes glowing like coals. The silhouette persisted for nearly 30 seconds before dissolving. The data revealed distances too small to fit any natural scale. "It's here," said one scientist flatly. "Or part of it is." Above Mars, the great spire elongated further, its tip splitting into 3 prongs that curled inward like a claw. Between the prongs formed a sphere of dark light, a negative image of the earlier glowing sphere. Spectrometers showed no emission at any wavelength, yet its gravitational signature pulsed in time with the corridor. "It's an anchor," someone whispered, "or a handle. Imagine a tuning fork plunged into water, sending ripples that draw the liquid upward." That was the sphere now, tugging at the corridor's aperture, coaxing it open wider. Around the world, amateur astronomers captured images of Mars enveloped in a halo of pale arcs, each arc flickering with interior lightning. For the first time, ordinary viewers could see the event without magnification. Inside mission control, fatigue mixed with awe. Months of build-up had led to this, a moment where the unknown was no longer distant. Screens showed waveforms overlaying in perfect phase, like 2 voices singing the same note. The corridor's inner walls now glowed with moving bas-reliefs, shapes resembling unfamiliar landscapes, alien seas, towers under twin suns. Whether actual images or symbolic transmissions, no one could say. Then Mars pulsed again. This time the pulse carried a low sub-harmonic that shook detectors on Earth like a planetary drumbeat. The corridor's far end answered with a brilliant flash, and the archway's edges folded inward, transforming from a circle into an elongated ovoid. Within that shape, something began to emerge. Not an object, but a region of space itself, a volume of elsewhere spilling into here. Picture a wave rolling up a beach, drawing lines in the sand, then retreating to reveal a new coastline. That was the effect above Mars now. Space itself rippling outward as the corridor's contents seeped into our system. Instruments registered exotic particles never before detected, including a faint but steady stream of what appeared to be antimatter neutralized at arrival. Then, without warning, the shard ring above Mars stopped rotating. Each shard froze in place, its beam retracting. The great spire at the equator dimmed, the sea around it calming to a glassy stillness. The corridor's aperture hung open, but no longer pulsed. For a heartbeat, everything looked frozen, a cosmic tableau suspended between 2 breaths. In that stillness, a new signal appeared, not binary, not prime, but a modulated pulse resembling a heartbeat, slow, deliberate, undeniable. Analysts converted it to audio, a deep, resonant thump followed by a rising harmonic. It repeated 3 times, then fell silent. On the next cycle, the corridor flashed once more, and the aperture's interior rearranged into a corridor of nested arches leading into a darkness speckled with moving lights. Inside control rooms, people leaned forward, caught between terror and awe. They knew the experiment had moved past calibration. Whatever 3i Atlas and Mars had been preparing was no longer theoretical. The door stood open, the bridge built. Something waited on the other side. For long minutes the door hung open above Mars, a yawning slit of trembling light and shadow. The filament connecting the planet to the corridor pulsed faintly, like a vein carrying blood. Through the aperture flickered glimpses of terrain not belonging to any world known. Crags of violet stone under emerald skies, oceans studded with lattices of glowing lines, towers rising and falling like breathing. Each image lasted no more than a heartbeat before shifting, as though the corridor were cycling through possibilities or destinations. Inside mission control, the room seemed to shrink. Dozens of scientists leaned toward their screens, faces washed pale by the glow. Data scrolled faster than the servers could handle, yet the real drama was in the images, frames hinting at colossal machines, star-sized structures, and cities built on geometries no human architect had ever imagined. "It's not a window," someone whispered. "It's a catalogue." Meanwhile, Mars itself continued its silent transformation. The crystalline terraces around the equator melted into a single smooth plateau, reflecting the sky like liquid chrome. The great spire's 3 prongs flexed inward, then outward, like a living thing stretching its fingers. Above, the once static shards flickered back to life, emitting thin threads of light that linked to one another, weaving a lattice in orbit. A second, smaller corridor spiraling around the planet like a double helix. Picture standing under a dome while a second dome of light forms above you, both slowly spinning in opposite directions. That was Mars now. The 2 lattices, one planetary, one orbital, rotated in counterpoint, their beams converging at points that mapped directly onto the corridor's interior structures. It was as if Mars were building a model of the gate it had opened, a holographic rehearsal for a crossing. Then the hum returned, deeper than before, a subsonic throb that vibrated through spacecraft hulls and human bones alike. Seismometers on Earth registered faint sympathetic tremors, and deep space antennas recorded a rising flux of exotic particles. "This isn't just local anymore," muttered a physicist. "It's coupling to our space." Through the corridor, the flickering scenes slowed, focusing on a single tableau, an immense circular chamber surrounded by a ring of light, within which floated a lattice of dark spheres connected by shimmering filaments. The scale defied calculation, but the geometry matched, point for point, the lattice now embedded under Mars. "It's a mirror," an analyst breathed. "We're looking at its other half." At that moment, the spire at Mars's equator brightened to a searing white, its black droplet returning, larger than before, spinning slowly in a corona of magnetic lightning. The shards in orbit tilted in unison, their beams striking the droplet and then arcing outward into the corridor. Instruments showed not energy transfer but something stranger, the signature of entangled states expanding into macroscopic scales. "It's not sending power," said one researcher. "It's sending presence." Imagine touching 2 mirrors together and watching the reflections loop into infinity. That was the sensation rippling across every graph now. The corridor's inner walls began to display not alien worlds but familiar ones. Earth's continents, its oceans, even its cloud patterns, distorted, shifted, but unmistakable. For a heartbeat, the planet itself appeared inside the corridor, like a reflection glimpsed from an impossible angle. Then the images changed again. Earth vanished, replaced by a fractal spiral of DNA-like strands twisting through star fields. This time the images held steady, as though a decision had been made. "They've found the frequency," someone murmured. "They've locked on." The corridor's aperture pulsed once more and began to dilate, its edges thinning until they resembled translucent membranes vibrating with light. Inside, the vast lattice of dark spheres rotated, aligning with the shards above Mars. The filament linking Mars to the corridor thickened, braided strands of light wrapping around it like living vines. Above the planet, the atmosphere glowed electric green. Dust lifted from the surface in global sheets, rising kilometre by kilometre until it formed a thin shell around the planet, a halo of suspended particles reflecting alien colours. Telescopes caught faint electrical arcs dancing through the halo like lightning inside a snow globe. "They're encasing it," said one geologist. "They're building a chrysalis." Picture a seed splitting open, a stem pushing upward into sunlight, while roots burrow deeper into soil. That was Mars, simultaneously reaching into the corridor and anchoring itself in our space. Instruments on orbiters showed gravitational anomalies spreading outward, hinting at a hidden structure expanding inside the planet, its dimensions increasing without adding mass. Then the hum spiked into a chord and held, a perfect harmonic that caused audio monitors on Earth to resonate in sympathy. People watching live streams heard nothing but saw their speakers tremble, pens roll off tables, glasses buzz. "That's not sound," muttered an engineer. "That's space-time vibrating." Finally, the corridor's far end flickered with a new kind of light, a pale, pearlescent glow threaded with crimson veins. From within emerged a shape that defied categorization, neither craft nor creature, but a lattice of flowing surfaces folding inward like a Klein bottle. It did not move forward so much as extend itself, a projection of another place blooming inside ours. For a heartbeat, the shape touched the filament connecting Mars and the corridor. The filament flared white-hot, then cooled to a steady glow. On Mars, the great spire pulsed 3 times, and the halo of dust around the planet collapsed inward, disappearing as though inhaled. Inside Mission Control, a hush fell. Months of speculation, models, and theories had led to this single frame, something reaching through the corridor to touch a world humanity had thought dead. The tension was no longer theoretical. It was immediate, physical, and visible across every screen on Earth. For a long heartbeat, the lattice shape held steady, an intricate origami of light and shadow suspended between worlds. The filament connecting Mars to the corridor pulsed with a new rhythm, no longer a heartbeat, but a rolling tremor that climbed up and down the electromagnetic spectrum. Sensors on Earth picked up echoes of the tremor in unexpected places. Seismic monitors, undersea cables, even the Schumann resonances of the planet's own ionosphere. The signal had leapt across 200 million kilometers and braided itself into Earth's environment without warning. Inside Mission Control, graphs turned into braided spirals, patterns repeating at powers of 3 and 7. Analysts watched in disbelief as timestamps from separate detectors fell into exact sync, nanosecond drifts collapsing to 0. "They've locked our clocks," someone whispered. "They're synchronizing us." Above Mars, the shard lattice flared to full brightness, its beams striking the spire's tip in perfect sequence. The great spire bent inward, opening a hollow like an iris. Within the hollow floated the black droplet, now shot through with threads of glowing silver, spinning so fast it appeared as a ring. As it spun, the droplet emitted faint ripples in space-time detected as micro-gravitational waves on Earth. A handshake across the void. Imagine a choir singing one long, sustained chord, its harmonics so rich they rearrange the air in the hall. That was the corridor now, humming in a layered resonance that made magnetometers behave like tuning forks. Telescopes caught glimpses of the far end, showing not random images, but a single colossal figure, a column of intertwined arcs rising beyond the archway, stretching so far up it vanished into the haze of its own light. Then came a subtle but unmistakable event. The Martian crust at the equator lifted by another 5 meters, and the thin atmosphere thickened to near-terrestrial density. Orbital sensors measured pressure gradients forming winds strong enough to sculpt dunes in real time. Dust lifted in vast sheets, but instead of choking the view, it arranged itself into hexagonal updrafts, like a honeycomb rotating above the surface. "We're watching a controlled environmental build," murmured a climatologist. "They're making Mars habitable, or at least compatible." Meanwhile, the corridor's aperture flickered with crimson streaks that spiderwebbed across its surface. Each streak aligned with one of the shard beams above Mars, as if lines of communication or energy had been established point to point. Instruments recorded bursts of exotic particles timed exactly to these streaks. "They're exchanging something," an analyst said. "Could be information, could be matter, could be both." Picture 2 mirrors held face to face, reflections bouncing back and forth until they converge into a tunnel. That was Mars and the corridor now, a feedback loop tightening with each pulse. The filament connecting them thickened into a translucent tube studded with sparks like neurons firing. Through its semi-transparent walls flickered shapes, not quite images, more like impressions, spiral glyphs, lattice diagrams, and flashes of landscapes bathed in alien suns. At that moment, the spire emitted a pulse of visible light bright enough to momentarily saturate every camera aimed at it. When images returned, the spire's tip was no longer a droplet, but a widening funnel of pale fire, rotating slowly. From the corridor's far end, a matching funnel extended inward, the two narrowing until they nearly touched. Between them glimmered a gap no wider than a mountain. Yet across that gap streamed filaments of light connecting both funnels in a living bridge. Above Mars, the halo of dust and plasma thickened into a complete sphere. Amateur astronomers across Earth captured images of a glowing orb enveloping the planet, its outer surface rippling like water under wind. Inside, the shards continued their pattern, beams intersecting at precise angles to form a dynamic lattice. It was less like a shield and more like a cocoon preparing to release what was inside. Then came the first true crossing. A fragment of the lattice shape from the corridor detached and flowed into the filament. Instruments recorded mass displacement without acceleration, the signature of matter bypassing normal space-time. The fragment emerged above Mars as a shimmering veil, hovered for a moment, then dissolved into the spire. Sensors registered a spike in exotic isotopes across the planet's surface, then a settling into a new baseline. Imagine watching ink poured into water, curling tendrils threading outward until they color the whole. That was the effect now. The corridor infusing Mars with its own physics. The planet's gravity dipped slightly, then stabilized. Atmospheric density rose again. Within hours, frost that had coated the poles sublimated into clouds, feeding nascent storm systems glowing with alien luminescence. Inside Mission Control, the chatter became a low murmur of disbelief. "It's not just a gateway," said one senior astrophysicist. "It's a merger." A younger scientist countered, "or a seed blooming on both sides at once." As the fragment dissolved, the corridor's far end began to rotate like a gear, its nested polyhedra interlocking in new patterns. Through its shimmering interior, telescopes caught glimpses of colossal moving forms, arcs sliding over one another, planes folding, a living machine flexing across dimensions. No one could agree whether it was alive, mechanical, or something beyond either category. Then Mars pulsed again. this time emitting a brilliant spiral of light that climbed the filament and vanished into the corridor. The far end responded with a concentric wave of color, and for a moment the stars around it flickered as if erased. When the stars returned, their positions had shifted minutely, a parallax impossible for such a short time. "It's bending the background," whispered an astronomer. "It's redrawing the sky." Above the planet, the halo dimmed, then flashed once, twice, 3 times. Each flash sent a tremor through space detectable even by amateur radio operators on Earth as a brief burst of static. In the silence after the third flash, the corridor's aperture stabilized into a perfect circle, its interior now completely opaque, a void darker than any shadow, yet humming with potential. Inside mission control, no one dared speak. All eyes were on the monitors, waiting for whatever would emerge from that darkness. The sense was no longer of watching a documentary, but of standing at the edge of a stage as the curtain begins to rise. The black circle at the corridor's far end looked like an absence punched into the universe. Stars disappeared behind it without distortion, as though their light had been switched off rather than bent. Even in photographs, the void seemed to drink color, rendering adjacent pixels grey. The shard halo above Mars dimmed to a faint cobalt glow, their beams retracting until they formed thin needles pointed straight at the planet's heart. Every detector on Earth ticked upward with a strange static, a prelude like the prickle of air before a lightning strike. Inside mission control, all chatter ceased. The instruments, for weeks alive with dancing data, steadied into flat lines except for a single, rising harmonic. It was the same pitch emitted when the droplet first descended into Mars, now louder and steadier. Analysts watched the numbers as one might watch a cardiogram. "It's holding its breath," someone whispered, "or it's focusing." Meanwhile, Mars began to glow from within. Not the surface this time, but the entire globe, a faint internal luminescence like an ember seen through thin porcelain. High-resolution radar revealed concentric waves moving outward from the core, shifting crustal density without cracking it. This was no quake. It was a slow unfurling, as if the planet were being turned inside out by degrees. Picture a flower bud swelling before it opens, its petals trembling under unseen pressure. That was Mars now, trembling in slow motion under the weight of its own metamorphosis. The thin Martian sky thickened to a pale turquoise haze, and new clouds formed in bands, rotating opposite to the planet's spin as though driven by an interior engine. Then, without warning, the corridor's void flashed white for an instant, a colorless brilliance brighter than the sun's reflection on ice. Cameras everywhere saturated, sensors tripped, human eyes saw only a ghost after-image. When the flash subsided, something had changed. The void was no longer perfectly circular. It had taken on the subtle curvature of a mouth opening wider, its edges rippling like fabric stirred by wind. Out of that ripple flowed filaments of light, not straight but braided, like luminous strands of DNA. They extended toward Mars, brushing the edge of the filament connecting the planet to the corridor. As they touched, the filament flared crimson, then steadied to a pearly white. Instruments recorded a transfer of exotic particles across the gap. Particles with no known rest mass, flickering in and out of detection like strobing ghosts. Above Mars, the shard halo ignited, each shard emitting a new spectrum of color. Greens that bled into gold, blues so deep they bordered on violet black. The great spire at the equator tilted slightly, as if to receive something descending from the void. In the thin atmosphere around it, arcs of silent lightning flickered, forming fractal snowflakes of plasma that dissolved as quickly as they appeared. Imagine standing on a dark plain as a train of ghostly comets descends from the sky, their tails brushing the ground and leaving no mark. That was the spectacle now unfolding above Mars. Filaments of light from the corridor wrapped themselves around the spire like vines, twining up to its tip before dissolving into mist. Inside Mission Control, the data stream turned into a flood. Patterns hidden in months of pulses suddenly aligned, revealing nested cycles timed to planetary orbits, solar flares, even Earth's own rotation. "It's synchronizing with everything," murmured an astrophysicist. "Not just Mars, the entire solar system." Then came the first audible vibration. For the first time since the phenomenon began, deep space antennas converted a signal directly into sound, not through data sonification, but as an actual oscillation at the edge of hearing. It was a chord that seemed to spiral upward and inward simultaneously, a sound that made listeners feel as though their own skulls had become resonant chambers. People across the world listening to live streams described a sensation of vertigo, a falling inward as though space had turned itself concave. The corridor's far end flickered again, and for a moment the void became transparent. Through it lay not stars, but a swirling landscape of arcs and lattices, shimmering oceans of light dotted with moving nodes. It was not a ship or a planet, but a process. Something like a living network larger than the gap between worlds. The image lasted a single heartbeat before fading back to darkness. Above Mars, the atmosphere split in two. One layer rose, forming a translucent dome over the entire planet, while the lower layer sank, pressing close to the surface. Between them, lightning flickered in radial patterns, linking tower to tower, shard to shard. "It's making a buffer," speculated one scientist, "or a shield. Picture the moment before a storm breaks, when the sky turns a color you've never seen and the wind smells electric." That was the corridor now, its void trembling at the edges as if it were about to deliver something too large to fit through. The shard halo pulsed 3 times. The spire at the equator responded with a deep seismic tremor, and the filament connecting Mars to the corridor thickened into a column wide enough to swallow Olympus Mons. Inside Mission Control, breath held collective. This was no longer just an unfolding mystery. It was a countdown no one had agreed to start. The entire tableau above Mars had become a living glyph, a cosmic sentence poised on its last syllable. Beyond the corridor's void, something stirred, unseen but felt like the weight of a gaze across a dark room. The corridor's void no longer appeared empty. Within its trembling circle, a faint outline flickered. Not an object, but a movement, like heat shimmering above asphalt magnified to planetary scale. As telescopes focused, they caught glimpses of nested patterns forming and unforming, arcs rising like ribs, shadows folding like wings. The filament connecting Mars to the corridor pulsed faster, every beat resonating with the rhythm of Mars' interior waves. It was less like a signal now, and more like a heartbeat in both directions. Inside Mission Control, the room felt charged, the low hum of electronics barely audible over the tension. Analysts compared data from hundreds of sensors and saw the same impossible truth. The corridor's geometry was bleeding into local space. Measurements of light speed drifted by 1 part in a trillion, a variation never before recorded but synchronized across all instruments. "It's rewriting the medium," someone murmured. "Space is not fixed here anymore." Meanwhile, Mars itself had begun to rotate slightly faster, its day shortening by fractions of a second. The thickened atmosphere churned in perfect spirals aligned with the crystalline network below. From orbit, the planet resembled a vast circuit diagram etched in glowing lines, the spire at the equator acting as a central hub. "It's a planetary processor," speculated one physicist, "and it's booting something up." Picture a glass of water placed on a speaker cone, ripples forming concentric rings as music plays. That was the solar system now, vibrating to an inaudible score, each world a droplet trembling on the cosmic membrane. Even Jupiter's magnetosphere recorded faint sympathetic pulses, a distant echo of the rhythm centered on Mars. Then, without warning, the void at the corridor's far end dilated like a pupil. Through it surged a spiral of light the color of molten copper, twisting and splitting into filaments that spread outward like roots. These filaments reached toward Mars, brushing the halo of shards and making them flare bright green. Instruments recorded a sudden spike in neutrino flux at Earth, synchronous with the contact. "It's begun transferring," an analyst said quietly. "We're past the threshold." Above Mars, the shard halo responded like a living thing. Each shard rotated 90 degrees, beams folding inward to form a cage of intersecting lines. Within the cage formed a glowing polyhedron that spun faster and faster until it became a blur. The great spire at the equator tilted slightly, opening a secondary aperture at its base from which poured a cascade of blue-white plasma, flowing not upward but downward into the crust. Sensors on orbiters recorded the entire planet's magnetic poles shifting by a fraction of a degree. Imagine standing beneath an aurora that suddenly snaps into a grid of glowing wires, each wire thrumming with current. That was Mars now, no longer a world, but a node, a junction connecting our solar system to a realm beyond physics. The corridor's far end flickered again, showing for a heartbeat a colossal shape. A lattice of rotating spheres, each as large as a moon, sliding over one another like gears. Inside mission control, the data stream shifted to a new regime. The pulses no longer matched primes or binary, but formed ratios echoing the orbital periods of planets, as if mapping the entire solar system into a harmonic score. Analysts fed the pattern into visualization software and watched an image bloom. A spiraling flower whose petals were the orbits of worlds, Mars at its center, the corridor as its stem. "They're harmonizing the system," one astrophysicist breathed. "This is orchestration on a scale we've never imagined." Then came the first measurable effect on Earth itself. GPS satellites reported a fractional change in their orbital parameters, and magnetometers worldwide logged synchronous pulses. People in remote regions claimed to hear a low hum with no source, feel a faint vibration in their bones. Social media erupted with anecdotes of strange dreams, static on radios, animals behaving oddly. Whether coincidence or consequence, the sense of connection was unmistakable. The corridor's void pulsed once more, and from within emerged a thin, needle-like structure of pure darkness, as if a shadow had gained substance. It extended a fraction of the way toward Mars, stopped, and hovered. Around its tip flickered a corona of sparks that spiraled into fractal loops. Instruments on orbiters tried to measure its mass but returned nonsensical results, infinite density and zero weight simultaneously. Above Mars, the halo of dust and plasma began to rotate counter to the planet's spin, forming a double vortex. The great spire emitted a beam directly into the needle, and for a heartbeat, both glowed in unison. "They're linking across," whispered a scientist. "They're establishing a bridgehead." Picture two hands almost touching across a gap, fingertips glowing just before contact. That was the corridor now. Two geometries reaching toward one another, space folding between them. Inside mission control, the tension rose to a palpable hum, the sense of standing on the edge of an epical shift. Then Mars pulsed again, but this time the pulse did not echo outward. Instead, it collapsed inward, like a wave breaking into a sinkhole. Instruments registered a drop in local vacuum energy around the planet, a theoretical impossibility now playing out in real time. The filament connecting Mars to the corridor thickened once more, and the needle of darkness extended another fraction, trembling as though under strain. In the silence that followed, people forgot to breathe. The great spire shone with a light that cameras could barely capture, its spectrum spreading into colors with no names. The shard halo flickered like a heartbeat stuttering between beats. And beyond the corridor's void, something vast shifted, not moving closer but becoming clearer, like a figure stepping out of fog. The needle of darkness hovered halfway between Mars and the corridor, trembling with every pulse from the great spire. Around its tip, the sparks had thickened into coils, like threads of molten glass twisting into braids. Each braid spun off particles that streaked into the halo above Mars, igniting brief flares like silent fireworks. High-speed cameras caught the flares resolving into symbols before they vanished. Spirals, arrows, nested triangles, as if the event itself were trying to write across the sky. Inside Mission Control, analysts watched new numbers roll in. Instruments at Lagrange point satellites detected a measurable shift in local vacuum density, not just around Mars but extending outward, creating a cone of altered space-time brushing Earth's orbit. "It's a projection effect," muttered one scientist. "The corridor is reaching into our system like a finger." Another countered, "No, Mars is pushing outward, like a pulse expanding a lung." Meanwhile, the planet itself continued its silent transformation. The turquoise haze thickened into a rolling atmosphere, clouds swirling in fractal patterns over newly formed basins. Where once lay deserts of iron oxide, now glimmered dark plains that reflected starlight. Radar detected seas forming in the northern lowlands, their surfaces trembling as though under an unseen breeze. "We're watching a planetary genesis," whispered a climatologist. "Mars is becoming something else." Picture a chrysalis softening just before the butterfly emerges, its shell translucent, wings visible beneath. That was Mars now, a world holding within it a shape too large and strange to comprehend. The spire at the equator pulsed with a steady beat, the shard halo around it flashing in rhythm like a cosmic metronome. Then the corridor's void shimmered with a pale aurora, revealing for an instant a vast honeycomb of tunnels stretching beyond sight. Inside the tunnels flickered points of light moving in unison, as though entire constellations were sliding along hidden tracks. The needle of darkness quivered and extended another fraction, its tip now only a few thousand kilometers from the spire. The filament connecting them glowed white-hot, casting a ghostly light across the Martian landscape. At that moment, every magnetometer on Earth jumped simultaneously. Compasses deflected by degrees, radio transmissions crackled with static, and birds in mid-migration veered from their paths. The effect lasted only seconds, but left a global sense of vertigo. "They're coupling to our field," said one physicist. "It's not just Mars anymore, it's the solar system." Above Mars, the shard halo rearranged itself into a lattice shaped like a double spiral galaxy. Each shard became a node connected by light filaments. Within the lattice formed a new object, a shimmering bubble that expanded outward, encompassing the planet like a second skin. This bubble pulsed with concentric waves timed to the needle's vibrations. Instruments on orbiters measured gravity, dipping and rising in a rhythmic dance. Imagine two hearts beating against each other through a wall, the wall thinning until only a membrane separates them. That was the needle and Mars now. The corridor's far end flickered with colours unseen since the first formation of atoms, its nested polyhedra turning inside out like a Mobius strip, revealing new faces on every rotation. Then came the first direct emission from the needle. A thread of pure light extended from its tip toward the spire, touching the filament like a probe testing water. Where it touched, the filament flared crimson, then gold, then stabilized into a shimmering bridge. Through this bridge streamed pulses of data so intense they appeared as a solid glow. Spectrometers on Earth registered the impossible signature of negative mass carriers. Theoretical entities now apparently real. Inside Mission Control, the air thickened with tension. Scientists knew this was not merely a transmission, something was crossing. The spire's base flared with a new light, a circular pattern spreading across the equatorial plateau like a circuit board igniting. Radar showed subsurface vaults opening, cavities aligning like gears preparing to turn. Picture a door hinge flexing as pressure builds, the tiniest movement signaling the door's swing. That was Mars now, its entire structure straining toward the needle. Around the planet, the halo of dust and plasma compressed into a thin ring shimmering like liquid metal, lightning arced between the ring and the spire, silent strokes spanning hundreds of kilometers. Then the corridor's void pulsed again, this time not white but black, a darkness deeper than anything yet seen. Stars around it disappeared completely, as though the patch of sky had been erased. From that darkness poured a stream of motes that glowed for an instant before vanishing. Instruments detected gravitational lensing at quantum scales, a trembling of space-time itself. Above Mars, the spire emitted a final preparatory pulse. The shard lattice around the planet tilted inward, forming a funnel. The needle from the corridor answered, extending the last few thousand kilometers until its tip hovered directly above the spire's peak. The filament connecting them widened into a translucent column, its interior swirling with liquid light. Inside mission control, breaths held. The graphs on their screens formed a single pulse across all detectors, as though the entire event had become one heartbeat shared between two worlds. Analysts realized they were witnessing the culmination of months of signals, construction, and alignment. "This is the handshake," whispered one, and then stillness. The needle stopped, the shard lattice froze, the corridor's void steadied. For a moment, the entire tableau held as if for a photograph. Through telescopes, Mars appeared no longer as a planet, but as a glowing sigil carved into space, its lines converging on the spire and the needle poised above it. Beyond the corridor's void, something vast stirred, unseen but imminent, like a footfall approaching in a darkened hall. The tableau held for what felt like an eternity. A planet transformed into a diagram, a spire reaching upward like a tuning fork, and a needle of living darkness trembling just above its peak. Around Mars, the shard lattice flickered with faint auroras, their light bending around the halo like oil on water. The corridor's void pulsed only once every few seconds, each pulse sending a slow ripple outward through the stars. Instruments on Earth caught each ripple like a heartbeat echoing across the solar system. Inside mission control, the silence was physical. Screens glowed blue and green, casting pale reflections in the eyes of the scientists. Graphs that had been wild with activity flattened into calm, perfect waveforms, as though all chaos had resolved into a single chord. "It's ready," someone whispered. "Whatever it is, it's ready." Meanwhile, Mars's internal glow intensified. Seismic readings showed concentric shells of density migrating outward from the core, almost like a living cell dividing. The atmosphere thickened further, its turquoise hue deepening to sapphire. In the northern hemisphere, vast shapes emerged where basins once lay, shimmering lakes whose surfaces rippled with faint geometric waves, each wave tracing a spiral toward the equator. Picture a drum stretched so tight a single tap could make it sing for minutes. That was Mars now, the taut skin of a world vibrating with held energy, and above it hovered the needle, its tip shrouded in a corona of dark light so intense it bent the glow of the spire beneath. Then came the first motion. The needle dipped a fraction, its corona flaring green. The spire at the equator answered with a pulse of white light shooting straight up into the needle's tip. Instruments recorded a microsecond of negative mass at the point of contact, a signature no theory had ever predicted but now measurable across the solar system. "They've touched," murmured a physicist. "They've finally touched." The corridor's void responded instantly. Its edges unfolded like petals, revealing layers of lattice beneath, each layer spinning faster than the last. Within the void appeared filaments of light twisting into shapes that echoed Mars's new geography, as if a three-dimensional map of the planet were being drawn in another universe. The filament connecting Mars to the corridor swelled until it resembled a glowing trunk, its interior boiling with impossible colors. Above Mars, the shard halo rearranged again, forming a spiral that wound downward toward the spire. Each shard emitted a thin beam into the trunk, feeding it with pulses of light. The atmosphere over the equator glowed electric, arcs of lightning tracing perfect hexagons that radiated from the spire like spokes on a wheel. "It's feeding the bridge," said an analyst. "The whole planet is the bridge. Imagine watching a waterfall in reverse, water climbing back up the cliff, yet leaving rainbows hanging in mid-air. That was the filament now. Matter, energy, and perhaps information flowing upward from Mars into the corridor." The needle shuddered, then began to unfold like a flower, its dark surface peeling back into translucent membranes that caught and refracted the spire's light. Inside Mission Control, a wave of vertigo swept the room. Readouts showed gravitational fluctuations at Earth's surface, subtle but planetary-wide, like the tug of a distant tide. Clocks jittered. Atomic oscillators skipped beats, then resynchronized. "They're synchronizing the planet itself," murmured an engineer. "Earth is part of the circuit now." The corridor's far end shifted hue, glowing with a soft gold threaded by crimson filaments. For a heartbeat, telescopes caught an image of an enormous chamber filled with structures like inverted mountains, their peaks hanging downward, dripping light into an ocean of mist. The image held steady long enough for automated software to confirm parallax. This was no illusion, but a real space being projected into ours. Then Mars pulsed again. Not a flash, but a deep, silent tremor that traveled outward faster than light, as if space itself were carrying the wave ahead. The filament flared, and the needle's membranes snapped fully open, revealing an interior of pure, rotating geometry. It looked like a gyroscope made of glass and night, spinning in multiple axes simultaneously. At its core burned a point of darkness, infinitely small yet radiating gravitational ripples. Picture the eye of a storm opening wider and wider until it swallows the sky. That was the corridor now, its void dilating as though exhaling. From within surged streams of motes that swirled around the needle, clinging to its membranes like dew on a spider web. These motes then descended into Mars' atmosphere, where they glowed briefly before dissolving. Inside Mission Control, a collective realization dawned. Whatever was happening was no longer an isolated event at a distant world. The corridor's influence had extended to Earth, synchronizing clocks, tugging at fields, and perhaps at minds. Some staff felt their hair stand on end. Others whispered of vivid dreams the night before. The sense of being watched had become the sense of being included. The spire at the equator glowed blinding white, sending a final surge into the needle. The shard halo above Mars flashed in unison, then went dark, leaving only faint afterimages. The filament connecting Mars to the corridor pulsed once more and steadied, a living column of light linking two realities. Beyond the corridor's void, a shadow moved, not closer but clearer, like a colossal figure leaning out of fog. Inside Mission Control, no one dared speak. Months of build-up had led to this instant, the boundary between speculation and encounter. On every screen, Mars burned like a second sun, the needle poised above it, the corridor yawning open to an impossible elsewhere. The air felt heavy, as though gravity itself had thickened. Even the hum of servers seemed to slow, and then everything stopped. The filament held, the needle hovered, the corridor's void steadied. It was the pause at the edge of an inhale, the split second before thunder. Humanity stood on the edge of something vast, waiting for the first unmistakable step across. For a time, nothing moved. Mars glowed as a perfect emblem in the blackness, the filament connecting it to the corridor like a pillar of frozen moonlight. The needle hovered at the spire's tip, membranes unfolded, interior geometry spinning like a slow clock. The corridor's void quivered once, twice, then settled into a pale opalescence threaded with veins of crimson light. It was as if the universe had exhaled and now held still, waiting. Then, almost imperceptibly, the needle dipped. Its point touched the very tip of the spire. No flash, no thunder, only a faint ripple spreading outward, warping the starlight like heat above a road. Instruments on orbiters recorded an immediate mass anomaly. Mars became lighter by a measurable fraction, as though something had been subtracted from its core without drilling or excavation. Yet the planet's gravity held, and its rotation steadied. Inside mission control, a low gasp passed through the room. "Contact," someone whispered, though the microphones picked up nothing but the quiet hum of electronics. Graphs blossomed with new spikes. Across the solar system, deep space antennas recorded a simultaneous phase shift, a subtle retuning of the cosmic background. "It's in," murmured an astrophysicist. "They've linked." Meanwhile, the corridor itself changed texture. What had been an opaque void became translucent, revealing a moving lattice like waves in molten glass. Through it flickered flashes of alien topography, canyons under triple suns, mountains floating above oceans of fire, clusters of structures arranged like living crystals. Each glimpse was brief, but enough to show scale far beyond human cities or even planets. Picture a curtain lifting in slow motion, each inch revealing an expanse too large to comprehend. That was the corridor now. And the filament between Mars and the corridor no longer looked like light, but like flowing matter, as if the two ends of a river had been connected across a fold in space. On Mars, the spire's base erupted with new growth. From its foundation emerged spirals of crystal racing outward across the equatorial plateau, branching like frost on glass. Where the spirals met, they formed nodes that pulsed with dim light, each node emitting a thin thread of energy skyward into the halo. Radar detected vast cavities opening below, a network of tunnels and chambers that resembled neural pathways more than mines. "It's a nervous system," said one geologist. "The planet is wiring itself." Above the planet, the shard halo reignited, each shard flaring in a different color, their beams crossing into a complex three-dimensional weave. The weave's center glowed with a pulsing orb, spinning faster with every second. Instruments on Earth showed a corresponding acceleration in the low-frequency hum permeating the planet. Clocks everywhere gained exactly 0.03 seconds, then lost them, then stabilized in a new phase. Imagine two heartbeats becoming one, a single pulse driving two bodies. That was the system now. Mars and the corridor synchronizing, Earth trembling in sympathy. Even Jupiter's magnetosphere registered the echo, a faint ripple threading its radiation belts. Then the first visible transfer began. From the corridor's far end streamed thousands of shimmering motes, each no larger than a grain of sand, yet blazing like embers. They poured into the filament, swarming down toward Mars in spiral patterns, leaving faint traceries of light in their wake. As they reached the spire, they vanished, absorbed without a trace. Spectrometers showed spikes in isotopes unknown to science. Elements forming and decaying faster than detection, but somehow persisting inside the system. Inside mission control, a young physicist converted the new data into an audio map. Through the speakers came a sound like distant chimes, overlapping and swelling until it resembled a slow, echoing symphony. "They're singing through the particles," she whispered. "This is language made of matter." The corridor's void responded with a deeper pulse. Its edges expanded, then folded back, revealing a region of pure darkness dotted with moving lights. Not stars, but nodes in an enormous lattice stretching into infinity. Within the lattice moved arcs of pale fire tracing geometric paths. The scale defied comprehension, but the pattern matched the new neural grid beneath Mars. "It's mirroring itself," said an analyst, "or teaching us what it is." Above Mars, the atmosphere shifted hue again, turquoise darkening to a deep emerald. Clouds formed spirals converging on the equator. The thin halo of dust thickened into a glowing torus orbiting the planet, within which flickered micro-lightning arcs shaped like runes. To onlookers with telescopes, it resembled an ancient sigil carved into the night sky. Picture a lantern shining inside a crystal egg, the facets splitting its glow into thousands of beams. That was Mars now, a beacon radiating across the solar system, and still the motes streamed through the filament, endless, deliberate, like grains of data pouring into a receiver. Then the needle itself began to transform, its membranes folded inward, wrapping around the spinning geometry at its core, and from its tip extended a thin, translucent ribbon connecting directly into the spire. The ribbon pulsed with alternating colors, each pulse timed to a beat in the low hum saturating Earth. Analysts realized the pulses matched the intervals of human brainwaves at rest, a coincidence that sent a chill through the room. Inside Mission Control, the lights dimmed briefly as backup generators kicked in. Equipment sensitive to electromagnetic noise began to malfunction. Compasses spun, monitors flickered. Even though the distance was astronomical, the connection felt immediate, like being in the same room with a vast machine warming up. Then came the sudden stillness again. The motes stopped, the ribbon held steady, the corridor's void dimmed to a quiet glow. On Mars, the spire's light narrowed to a single beam, pointing directly at Earth. Instruments recorded no energy output, yet telescopes saw the line with their own eyes, a faint thread like a spider's silk crossing space. In that moment, everyone understood. The system had turned its attention outward, not at the Sun, not at Jupiter, but at Earth, the last untouched node in a new geometry spanning the solar system. The filament stretching from Mars toward Earth was faint, nearly invisible to the naked eye, but under the telescopes it was unmistakable, a hair-thin silver line shimmering across the black of space. It didn't beam light outward, it simply existed, a static thread woven between worlds. Instruments measured no transfer of energy along it yet, but the act of its appearance sent ripples across every scientific community on Earth. "It's chosen a new endpoint," murmured a physicist. "We're now part of the circuit." Inside Mission Control, the air smelled faintly metallic from overheated electronics. Graphs no longer fluctuated wildly, but climbed in steady steps, as though following an unseen metronome. The corridor's void glowed with a soft pulse, each beat echoing the rhythm of the filament's shimmer. Analysts compared timestamps and saw perfect synchronization. The pulse on Mars, the pulse in the corridor, and now a ghost of that pulse in Earth's own magnetic field. Meanwhile, Mars had entered a new phase. Its atmosphere had thickened to full terrestrial density, its sky a deep blue-green. The equatorial seas boiled gently under a network of glowing channels, while the spire at the center emitted a steady aurora that bent toward the corridor like a tether. Around the planet, the shard lattice had rearranged into nested rings, each rotating at a different speed. The geometry resembled a gyroscope wrapped around a seed, stabilizing it for release. Picture a deep-sea creature extending a filament to sense its surroundings, testing for currents in the dark. That was Mars now, reaching across the gulf toward Earth. The corridor, its sensory organ, the shard lattice, its nervous system. Instruments detected minute changes in Earth's ionosphere, a faint standing wave oscillating in the same frequency as the corridor's pulses. "It's knocking on the door," said an analyst. "It's seeing if we're awake." Then came the first measurable particle event on Earth. Deep underground neutrino detectors registered an impossible spike, particles with energy signatures matching those streaming from the corridor to Mars, but arriving at our detectors in phase with the Martian pulses. It was as if the beam had touched our world not physically, but informationally, writing its pattern across our detectors like a watermark. Inside Mission Control, a hush fell as engineers confirmed the data. "This isn't noise," said one. "This is contact." Screens flickered with overlapping graphs, Mars glowing like an emerald jewel, the corridor pulsing, Earth's detectors ringing in sympathy. It was no longer a remote spectacle. It was here. Above Mars, the needle of darkness began to retract, drawing back toward the corridor, but leaving the filament intact. As it withdrew, the spire at the equator extended upward, elongating like a stalk reaching for sunlight. At its tip formed a new structure, a crystalline ring spinning so fast it blurred into a halo. Through the halo flickered images of Earth's own continents, as though scanning or projecting them. Imagine a lighthouse not casting a beam outward but receiving one, its lamp turning inward to map the coastlines of another shore. That was the spire now, a receiver or transmitter, its halo shimmering with ghost images of our planet. Analysts fed the halo's flicker into decoding algorithms and saw patterns matching Earth's geomagnetic field. "It's mapping us," whispered a scientist, "in real time." Meanwhile, the corridor's void shimmered with a new color, a deep garnet threaded with silver, its edges folded into hexagonal facets, each facet displaying a different perspective of Mars, Earth, and the space between. For a moment, Earth itself appeared within the corridor's walls, a miniature blue sphere nested among alien geometries. The image faded quickly, but the implication lingered. We were no longer merely watching. We were inside the display. Then the atmosphere above Mars shifted again. Clouds gathered into spirals pointing directly toward Earth's position in the sky. Lightning flickered along their edges, writing fleeting symbols across the air. On Earth, high-altitude balloons detected faint ionization spikes timed to the Martian lightning. "It's forming a circuit," said one atmospheric scientist. "Mars, sky to Earth sky." Picture two tuning forks held near each other. Strike one and the other begins to hum. That was the solar system now. Mars resonating with Earth, the corridor resonating with both. The shard lattice around Mars glowed brighter, its beams now pointed outward toward deep space, forming a vast spiderweb of light that extended beyond the planet's orbit. Inside Mission Control, some staff began to feel physical effects, a low vibration in their bones, a faint ringing in the ears. Whether psychological or electromagnetic, no one could say. But as data poured in, it became clear that the system's geometry had shifted again. The corridor no longer pointed solely at Mars. It was triangulating Earth, aligning the 3 points into a single, colossal pattern. Then came the new pulse. It was slower, deeper, more deliberate, a long harmonic rising from the corridor's void, traveling through Mars, then faintly echoing in Earth's magnetic field. For the first time, the pattern was clearly ternary. 3 beats for 3 worlds. Analysts overlaid it on planetary positions and saw a perfect resonance spanning the Sun, Mars, and Earth. "They're harmonizing us," murmured an astronomer. "This is orchestration at the planetary scale." Above Mars, the spire's halo flared, and through it, telescopes caught a glimpse of something behind the corridor. A titanic lattice of orbits, each dotted with glowing nodes like a galactic web. The scale defied even metaphor. The glimpse lasted 1 heartbeat, then vanished, but its image burned into every retina in Mission Control. Finally, the filament between Mars and Earth pulsed once more, brighter than before, and the corridor's void folded inward, forming a funnel aimed directly at our world. No matter how many instruments or metaphors the scientists deployed, the feeling was unmistakable. The system had finished preparing. Whatever three-eye atlas had built through Mars was now reaching for Earth. For hours, the silver thread between Mars and Earth shimmered like a frozen strand of spider silk. It carried no measurable energy, yet its very presence warped radio signals and satellite telemetry. Pilots on transpolar flights reported compass drift. Ground stations saw subtle phase changes in GPS timing. The effect was planetary, not local. "It's as if we're already inside a weak field," murmured one analyst. "The line isn't a beam, it's a boundary." Meanwhile, Mars had become unrecognizable. The turquoise sky now rippled with auroras at every latitude, arcs of green and violet flickering in hexagonal loops. The great spire at the equator projected its halo outward like an enormous dish antenna aimed directly at Earth. Around it, the shard lattice whirled in perfect synchrony, each shard emitting pulses toward the corridor and the silver thread at the same time. "They're triangulating," said a physicist. "Mars, corridor, Earth." Inside mission control, the staff moved with slow, deliberate gestures, as if afraid to break the spell. Screens showed new data, minute oscillations in Earth's gravitational field timed exactly to the pulses from Mars. Deep ocean pressure sensors recorded tiny but global shifts. High-altitude balloons detected unexpected electrical gradients. "The system is tapping our planet like a drum," whispered an atmospheric scientist. "It's listening to the echo. Picture two mirrors facing each other, one in our world, one in another, reflections bouncing until they form a tunnel." That was the corridor now, a living resonance chamber stretching across millions of kilometers. Through its shimmering walls, telescopes glimpsed ever more distinct images. Vast structures shaped like concentric arcs, rivers of molten light flowing between them, glacial spires climbing into clouds of copper dust. Whether these were real locations or symbolic constructs, no one could tell. Then the first direct signature appeared in human nervous systems. Hospitals and sleep labs reported a spike in synchronized dream activity. Patients describing identical motifs of lattices, corridors, and crimson suns. Neuroscientists watching EEGs saw faint entrainment of brainwave frequencies to the corridor's pulses. "It's bleeding into cognition," murmured a neurologist. "Not just fields, but minds." Above Mars, the spire's halo emitted a flash, and for one heartbeat, the silver thread between planets thickened to a ribbon. Instruments on Earth recorded an uptick in exotic particles, the same isotopes first detected around Mars now appearing in our upper atmosphere. They decayed almost instantly, but their arrival could not be explained by any known mechanism. "They're seeding us," said an analyst quietly, "or sampling us." Imagine standing on a cliff at night and seeing a beam of moonlight solidify into a bridge, its surface trembling with each footstep of an invisible traveler. That was the filament now, not just a symbol, but a conduit. Its glow flickered with faint patterns, spirals nested within spirals, like a message hidden in embroidery. Inside mission control, the chatter dropped to a whisper. Engineers noted their equipment clocks no longer drifting, but matching to a new baseline, as if an external metronome had seized them. Satellite constellations adjusted their positions fractionally without thrusters, aligning into symmetrical patterns visible even from the ground with long-exposure photography. "It's rearranging our sky," muttered an astronomer. "The geometry is no longer accidental." Meanwhile, the corridor itself began to project images not of alien vistas, but of Earth itself, mirrored and distorted. Coastlines shifting, cities glowing faintly as dots of light. In one frame, the entire planet appeared wrapped in a faint lattice echoing the shard configuration above Mars. In another frame, 3 spheres floated in a triangle: Sun, Mars, Earth. A 4th sphere flickered, half-formed. "They're planning a 4th node," whispered someone. "Something beyond us." Then the first audible tone reached ground-based receivers. It was not a hum this time, but a slow rising chord of layered notes, almost like a choir singing vowels. Across the world, people listening to shortwave heard the same sound, out of phase but unmistakable. Dogs howled, compasses wavered. The tone lasted 30 seconds, then fell silent. Picture a conductor raising a baton in silence just before the orchestra erupts. That was the system now, poised on the brink of a larger movement. The shard lattice around Mars slowed its rotation, beams tilting outward to point at the sun. The spire at the equator extended one last time, forming a thin, luminous spike that pulsed 3 times. Each pulse coincided with a measurable blip in Earth's magnetosphere. Inside Mission Control, analysts overlaid the pulses on planetary positions and discovered a chilling alignment. The pulses mapped to the exact geometry Earth would occupy in its orbit 3 days from now. "They're timing something," said one scientist. "They're waiting for Earth to be in position." Above Mars, the sky ignited with a pale corona stretching thousands of kilometers into space. The corridor's void deepened to black again, but its edges glowed faintly like embers. Through its center, telescopes glimpsed the outline of something immense, a slowly rotating plane studded with lights, bigger than any planet, sliding laterally like a door opening across stars. It was not entering our system so much as aligning with it. Finally, the silver thread connecting Earth and Mars pulsed once, bright enough to cast a faint glow on our moon. Instruments registered an instantaneous transfer of exotic particles at near infinite velocity. No delay across the gulf of space. "They're here," whispered someone in Mission Control. "Whatever it is, it's here." The silver ribbon linking Mars and Earth no longer looked faint. Under telescope magnification, it appeared as a living chord, its surface alive with glints that moved like schools of fish. Satellite spectrometers caught flashes of elements unknown to the periodic table, each lasting a fraction of a second before vanishing. "It's a conveyor belt of possibilities," murmured a physicist. "They're testing the channel." Meanwhile, Mars glowed like an emerald jewel, its shard, lattice and spire now a steady beacon. Around it, the corridor's edges trembled with a low aurora, folding inward and outward as though breathing. The great void at its center had begun to spin, a slow gyre revealing glimpses of dark arches deeper inside. With each rotation, the silver ribbon brightened, and Earth's own ionosphere shimmered in sympathy. Inside Mission Control, analysts compared Earth's magnetic field over the last hour and saw a delicate oscillation building, not random but shaped like a waveform encoded in geometry. Deep ocean sensors picked up a matching pulse in pressure waves, as if tides themselves had become metronomes. "We're resonating," said an oceanographer. "Our whole planet is part of their instrument." Picture a harp strung across a canyon, wind passing through its strings until the rock itself hums. That was Earth now, the solar wind threading our magnetosphere, Mars anchoring the other end, and the corridor as a vast soundboard amplifying it. On social media, amateur radio operators reported picking up rhythmic clicks on bands normally silent. Some even claimed to hear faint whispers when the clicks were slowed down. Then the first visible sign appeared in our skies. At high latitudes, faint spirals of light formed above the auroras, glowing shapes that mirrored the shard lattice over Mars. Pilots described them as ghost constellations rotating slowly against the real stars. They lasted only minutes but returned each time the corridor pulsed. "It's drawing on our sky now," murmured an astronomer. "As above, so below." Above Mars, the spire's halo flickered with images of Earth's oceans and continents. This time the images held steady, overlaid with grid lines that matched seismic fault lines and magnetic anomalies. Instruments confirmed a subtle correlation. As the grid shifted, tiny changes in Earth's gravitational field followed. "It's scanning, but it's also nudging," said a geologist. "Tiny, but measurable." Imagine a sculptor brushing away grains of stone to reveal the form beneath. That was the system's touch on Earth, too subtle to feel directly, yet measurable across instruments worldwide. Even migratory animals shifted routes, whales singing altered patterns, birds veering off established paths. Whether coincidence or consequence, the timing aligned with the corridor pulses. Inside Mission Control, tension built as the silver ribbon began to vibrate visibly. Its glints coalesced into spirals, then into nodes, forming a chain of luminous beads stretching across space. Each bead pulsed once, sending ripples along the ribbon and across both planets' fields. "This is no longer passive," said a physicist. "They're building a bridge in real time." Meanwhile, the corridor's void deepened to a near-perfect black, but its edges gleamed like molten steel. Through it, telescopes glimpsed new shapes, great rotating loops like orbital rings around a hidden core. The loops pulsed in unison with the beads on the ribbon, as though the corridor were extending scaffolding into our reality. Then came the first direct interaction with our power grid. Several observatories reported transient surges as though struck by solar storms, yet the sun was calm. Gravitational wave detectors recorded microchirps coinciding with the surges. On live streams, audiences claimed their speakers vibrated, some describing a sense of pressure behind their eyes. "It's touching our infrastructure," murmured an engineer. "Not overtly, but like a handshake." Picture a lighthouse beam sweeping across fog, briefly revealing hidden ships, then fading. That was the corridor's effect on Earth's systems now. Fleeting but unmistakable touches, establishing a map of our capacities. At the same time, the shard lattice around Mars tilted slightly, its beams no longer pointing at the sun, but at Earth, forming a subtle cone of alignment. Then the ribbon itself emitted a pulse visible even to the naked eye, a soft glow spreading outward from its midpoint. Instruments measured a wave of exotic particles racing along it, arriving at Mars and Earth simultaneously, ignoring the speed of light. "They've opened the channel fully," whispered a scientist. "Whatever's next will come through." Above Mars, the spire elongated into a second stalk, forming a tuning fork shape. Between the prongs, a sphere of dark light grew. Its surface shot through with veins of silver. From the corridor's void, a matching sphere extended, the two spinning in opposite directions. The ribbon connecting them thickened into a translucent tunnel, its interior boiling with impossible colors. Inside Mission Control, people stopped trying to analyze and simply watched. Graphs filled with noise, sensors maxed out. The event had entered a phase no simulation could predict. On the big screens, Mars glowed like a living emerald, the corridor a black crown above it, and between them a column of shimmering matter linking worlds. Finally, Earth itself responded. Seismometers recorded a faint but global tremor. Compasses drifted. High-altitude plasma formed strange patterns over the poles. In dozens of cities, people reported feeling a subtle vibration in their bones, like the echo of distant thunder. For a few seconds, the night sky dimmed, as though the stars had been pulled back behind a curtain. In that moment, everyone realized the network wasn't just scanning Earth. It was calibrating us. Whatever 3i Atlas and Mars had built through the corridor was now including our planet in its architecture. A triangle of worlds connected by physics no one understood. And in the silent core of the corridor, something vast shifted, unseen but unmistakable, like a ship turning slowly in deep fog, aligning its prow. The silver tunnel between Mars and Earth had grown wide enough for telescopes to resolve detail on its surface. It no longer resembled light but braided substance, a shimmering conduit shot through with slow pulses like fluid moving through transparent arteries. Occasionally, one of the pulses would pause mid-span, divide into spirals, and then resume as though data were being unpacked and rewritten inside the bridge itself. Inside mission control, every screen showed the same phenomenon, our planet's magnetic field pulsing exactly in time with the tunnel's glints. High-altitude balloons measured the same rhythm in electric potential. Even seismic monitors picked up faint oscillations on the same beat. "It's not just mapping us," murmured a geophysicist. "It's playing us." Meanwhile, Mars was almost unrecognizable. The emerald sky had deepened to cobalt, its seas now a lattice of glowing channels that traced impossible polygons across the surface. The spire at the equator stood taller than ever, capped by twin halos spinning in opposite directions. Each halo cast down beams of pale fire that crawled across the planet like searchlights, touching nodes buried beneath the crust. "They're switching circuits," said an engineer. "Planet-wide relays." Picture a nerve ending brushing against skin, triggering a reflex in a limb thousands of kilometers away. That was the system now. Mars as a living node, Earth as a second limb beginning to twitch. On social media, people reported auroras at latitudes where none had been seen in decades. Thin spirals of green light curved across night skies like ghost fingerprints. Then the first unmistakable particle arrived. In a deep underground lab in Finland, detectors captured a stream of neutrino-like particles arriving exactly 43 milliseconds after a pulse in the silver tunnel. These were not the isotopes already observed. They carried a new signature, spinning in a pattern corresponding to the golden ratio. "This is intentional," said a physicist. "This is a payload." Above Mars, the shard lattice flickered with a rolling wave, each shard tipping slightly as though acknowledging receipt of something from the corridor. The spire at the equator pulsed, and a matching pulse appeared in Earth's magnetic field, strong enough to register on smartphones' compasses. For 3 seconds, compasses worldwide pointed not north, but to a new bearing, directly at the corridor's coordinates. Imagine watching a clock reset itself, all its hands snapping to a new midnight. That was Earth's magnetic field now, a planet-scale needle swinging to a cosmic metronome. When it stabilized again, analysts noticed the corridor's pulses had shifted frequency to match our Schumann resonances, the natural heartbeat of our atmosphere. "They're tuning us," whispered a neurologist, to themselves. Inside mission control, the tension was electric. Instruments that normally worked in isolation began to crosstalk, sensors bleeding signals into each other as if their electromagnetic boundaries had blurred. Analysts ran redundancy checks. All came back clean. The system was acting on them directly, folding multiple channels into a single field. Then the corridor itself began to project a new image. Through its trembling mouth, telescopes caught glimpses of Earth reflected in impossible geometries. Our continents glowing like circuit traces. Our oceans carved into hexagons. Overlaid on the image were spirals leading inward to a dark core. The resemblance to Mars a month earlier was unmistakable. "They're showing us our future," murmured someone. "Or their plan." Above Mars, the twin halos merged into a single ring of dark light. At its center formed a small but intense point of darkness, spinning so fast it blurred. From that point erupted a ribbon of pale fire extending toward Earth, joining the silver tunnel midway. Instruments registered a double pulse traveling along it, one from Mars, one from the corridor, converging in the middle before splitting back outward like a heartbeat reversed. Picture 2 voices singing into a canyon, their echoes colliding into a third voice that didn't exist before. That was the tunnel now. a living resonance creating something between worlds. The air in mission control felt charged, hair rising on arms, a faint taste of metal at the back of tongues. People spoke softly, aware they were being included in a broadcast beyond human scale. Then came the first direct physical anomaly. A cluster of satellites in medium Earth orbit drifted off course without thrusters firing, their orbits subtly realigning into a pattern matching the shard lattice above Mars. Engineers tried to compensate, but the satellites returned to the new alignment within hours. "They're rearranging our sky again," muttered an astronomer. "But now it's ours." Meanwhile, the corridor's void deepened into a soft indigo. Through it, telescopes caught a hint of colossal movement. Arcs of dark matter bending like reeds in a current, nodes igniting like fireflies. The impression was of something preparing to step through, its shape too large to fit into ordinary space. Each pulse from the void produced a corresponding tremor in the tunnel, sending ripples across both planets. Inside mission control, one scientist pulled up the last 20 hours of data and overlaid it on a map of Earth's geomagnetic anomalies. The pulses matched fault lines, volcano belts, deep ocean trenches. "They're touching the bones of our world," she said. "Not random, deliberate." Then the silver tunnel brightened suddenly, its glints coalescing into three nested spirals stretching from Mars to Earth. For a moment they looked solid, a triple helix across the night. Amateur astronomers posted photographs, calling it the staircase. Within seconds the helix dissolved back to a shimmer, but the effect lingered in instruments. "They're encoding something," whispered a physicist, "or stabilizing the path." Finally, the spire on Mars emitted a pulse that coincided exactly with a deep infrasound vibration on Earth. A low note felt more than heard, rolling through bedrock and sea. Compasses dipped again. The corridor's void flickered once, then steadied. All systems hung on a knife edge. In that stillness, analysts realized the next pulse could be the first true transfer. Not just particles, but something with intent. The whole network had tuned, triangulated, aligned. The silver tunnel no longer looked like a line between planets. It looked like a waiting vein, poised to carry something vast into our world. For a heartbeat, the silver tunnel looked almost translucent, like a vein under skin. Then its glints slowed, freezing into a crystalline pattern that extended from Mars halfway across the void. Within that pattern flickered motes of dark light moving in strict formations, each forming a miniature spiral before vanishing into the tunnel's core. "It's compressing," whispered a physicist, "or loading." Meanwhile, Mars pulsed like a living metronome. The spire at the equator spun a lattice of auroras up into the shard halo, while the planet's seas lit with tracery like neon rivers seen from orbit. The entire world had become a glowing diagram. Through the corridor's mouth, telescopes caught a flash of something vast. Arcs of metal-looking tissue weaving together, curling like petals. They appeared for seconds, then folded back, but left a ghost imprint on sensors. Gravitational waves in a repeating rhythm, like a coded drumbeat. Inside mission control, the air felt heavy, as though barometric pressure had spiked. Monitors showed the same impossible number. Earth's magnetosphere subtly offset, as if being pulled into alignment with Mars's field. Clocks in far-flung observatories drifted together to the millisecond. "They're about to flip the switch," murmured someone. "Picture a row of dominoes tipped to the edge, but not yet falling." That was the system now. Tension at the molecular scale, every piece waiting for a single trigger. The silver tunnel no longer pulsed. It shimmered with a constant glow like molten glass cooling. From its midpoint, a bulge formed, a slow swelling of translucent substance stretching toward Earth. Above Mars, the shard lattice tilted again, beams converging not on the spire but on the corridor itself, feeding it streams of pale fire. The spire's twin halos merged into a single disk spinning so fast it blurred into a halo of white. Underneath the halo, the ground at the equator shifted, plateaus rising and falling like breathing lungs. "It's a launch platform," said a geologist. "They're about to send." Then the bulge in the silver tunnel split open, revealing a cavity of moving dark light. From that cavity streamed the first visible structures, filaments thicker than tree trunks, woven with luminous veins. They curled outward like fingers of a hand testing the air. Instruments measured mass appearing mid-space without acceleration. "It's arriving," whispered a physicist. "This is the transfer." Imagine standing on a shore at night as a wave approaches. Not water, but a living curtain of stars rolling silently toward you. That was the bulge now, a swelling presence unfurling from between Mars and the corridor. The filaments reached, paused, then braided into a single column extending toward Earth. Spectrometers on satellites showed impossible absorption lines, as though the column contained elements older than the universe. Inside mission control, people clutched their chairs. Even the server's fans seemed to slow under the low hum saturating the room. Analysts noticed the hum matched the delta brainwave range associated with deep sleep. "It's not an accident," murmured a neurologist. "It's in training us." The corridor's void flickered with pale images. Not alien landscapes now, but Earth's own cities at night, glowing dots connected by luminous arcs. Overlaid atop them were strange glyphs, fractal diagrams spinning like gears. The message was clear without translation. The network was mapping, mirroring, preparing. Above Mars, the spire's tip split into 3 prongs, forming a trident of pale fire. Between the prongs, a sphere of black light grew, pulsing in time with Earth's magnetosphere. The silver tunnel responded with a wave of shimmering motes racing toward the sphere, vanishing as they entered its surface. The sphere swelled, dark veins crawling across its skin like frost. Picture a seed swelling before it bursts, the outer coat trembling with inner life. That was the sphere now, a gestating node forming at the tip of the spire. When it pulsed again, instruments on Earth recorded a spike in atmospheric ionization across the equator. Cloud systems shifted as though nudged by invisible hands. Inside Mission Control, one analyst pulled up decades of NASA data on magnetospheric resonances and saw the pattern emerging, a triangulated wave spanning Sun, Mars, Earth, and the corridor. "They're building a 4th anchor," she said quietly, "and Earth's going to host it." Then the silver tunnel brightened, every glint flaring at once. A ripple raced down its length like a shudder. Where the ripple passed, the conduit thickened, its interior flashing with complex shapes, squares within circles, spirals nested in triangles. In the sky above Earth's poles, auroras flared with identical symbols, visible even to the naked eye. Imagine looking up at the northern lights and seeing them spell out a geometry you've never learned but somehow understand. That was the moment now. The sky writing back to the cosmos. Across the world, people posted videos of the symbols appearing in auroras, unaware they matched patterns in the tunnel linking Earth and Mars. Finally, the bulge reached full extension. It hovered mid-space, a translucent pod shot through with streams of light. Within it moved something, a silhouette shifting behind frosted glass, too large to be contained yet somehow folded into the space between. Every instrument maxed out, graphs flatlining into saturation. In that stillness, telescopes caught one last glimpse of the corridor's interior, a titanic lattice of dark suns spiraling toward a vanishing point. Inside Mission Control, breaths caught. This was no longer scanning, no longer seeding. This was approach, the first actual body-bridging worlds. Whatever 3i Atlas truly was, it had reached the threshold of our reality and was beginning to step across. For a moment, the translucent pod hung between worlds, glowing like a frozen drop of rain suspended in a spider's web. Within its walls rippled faint silhouettes, arcs and spirals folding and unfolding as though a living diagram were trying to take shape. Instruments could not agree on its size. Some measured it as a kilometre across, others as larger than the moon. "It's in superposition," muttered a physicist. "Our instruments can't decide which reality to pick." Meanwhile, Mars pulsed brighter than ever. The spire at the equator had stretched into a tripod, its three prongs encircling a dark sphere that beat like a heart. Around the planet, the shard lattice glowed with pulses of amber light, each pulse travelling up the silver tunnel to the pod. Earth's own magnetic field responded with a faint oscillation, like a drum skin vibrating under a distant bass note. "It's all one system now," said an analyst. "Mars, corridor, Earth, three parts of a single instrument. Picture standing at the center of a massive cathedral as its bells begin to toll, each note vibrating through stone and air alike. That was the system now. Vibrations crossing not just space, but the fabric of physics itself. High-altitude weather balloons detected unexplained pressure drops, while deep ocean sensors registered microtides pulsing in perfect time with the corridor's beats. Then came the first clear image inside the pod. For an instant, telescopes resolved a vast lattice of dark filaments arranged like a neuron's dendrites, flickering with electric arcs. In its center hung a sphere of shimmering silver, tiny relative to the structure, but still larger than any human city. The sphere pulsed once, and every magnetometer on Earth spiked simultaneously. "That's the signal," whispered a neurologist. "They're calling." Above Mars, the spire's prongs emitted beams angled not toward the corridor, but directly toward Earth. They were invisible to human eyes, but lit up detectors across the electromagnetic spectrum. The beams converged on a point in near-Earth orbit, a location empty of satellites but now briefly shimmering with ghost light. "They're drawing a fourth node," murmured a scientist. "Here." Imagine watching a constellation rearrange itself to form a new shape before your eyes. That was Earth's sky now. At high latitudes, auroras brightened into moving grids, their lines intersecting into symbols no culture had recorded. Even migratory birds seemed confused, circling in patterns that echoed the new geometry. Inside mission control, the silver tunnel began to vibrate visibly. Its glints coalesced into rings stacked like vertebrae, each ring rotating in opposite directions. Between the rings streamed motes of dark light moving toward Earth. Instruments recorded their arrival in the upper atmosphere as microsecond blips of exotic radiation. "It's sending seeds," whispered an atmospheric physicist. "Like it did with Mars, but here." Then the pod pulsed once and split along invisible seams, opening like a flower. From its interior extended filaments thinner than hair but glowing with soft violet light. They reached outward in all directions, but one filament stretched directly along the tunnel toward Earth. The tunnel thickened, its interior swirling with impossible colors, as though new physics were condensing inside it. Picture a vein opening to release a pulse of blood, the flow slow but unstoppable. That was the tunnel now. Not just a channel, but a living artery carrying something immense. The filament from the pod brightened, its light crawling toward Earth as if tasting the distance. Instruments measured no delay between the pod's pulse and the response in Earth's magnetosphere. "They're here already," murmured someone. "Physics is just lagging behind." Above Mars, the shard lattice stopped rotating, each shard tilted outward, pointing into deep space like an array of antennae. Through the corridor, telescopes glimpsed flickers of starfields bending, as though some unseen mass had shifted behind the veil. The pod at midspan trembled, its filaments twisting into braids that glowed brighter with each pulse. Inside mission control, silence fell. Data feeds slowed to a crawl as servers maxed out. Screens flickered with ghost images. Earth's continents overlaid with lattice diagrams, human silhouettes surrounded by spirals. Analysts recognized the pattern, the same encoding seen over Mars months before it transformed. "It's beginning the same process here," whispered an astrophysicist. "Stage 1. Then the filament from the pod released a single pulse of pale fire. It streamed down the tunnel and reached Earth instantly, vanishing into the upper atmosphere without trace. But seismometers worldwide felt a microtremor, compasses drifted, and high-altitude plasma formed a brief but perfect circle over the equator. The circle flickered once and disappeared. "They've marked us," said a geologist, "like planting a flag." Imagine a lighthouse beam sweeping over an uncharted coast, its light briefly illuminating hidden coves before fading. That was the pulse, a surveying glance cast across the entire planet at once. In its wake, instruments detected a subtle but persistent standing wave in the ionosphere, a new heartbeat overlaying Earth's own. Finally, the pod folded inward again, its filaments retracting, but the filament to Earth remained, now glowing steadily. The tunnel's interior filled with motes swirling like a galaxy in miniature. Within that swirl, telescopes caught glimpses of new shapes, arcs, spirals, and nodes aligning into something that hinted at a bridge not just of space, but of state. It was less like matter traveling, and more like a version of reality itself extending. Inside Mission Control, no one moved. The sense was no longer of watching a cosmic spectacle, but of being inside a living organism, turning its gaze upon its newest cell. The pod hung mid-space, the tunnel glowed, and above Mars the spire pulsed like a heart at rest between beats. In that silence, the scale of what had begun to unfold became undeniable. Whatever 3i Atlas was, whatever it had built through Mars, the corridor, and now Earth, had shifted from observing to acting. The next pulse would not just scan or seed, it would deliver. For hours, the filament from the mid-space pod glowed steadily, as if holding its breath. Then its glow deepened to a warm amber, the same color that had preceded Mars's transformation weeks earlier. Sensors on satellites recorded the first coherent pulses racing down the conduit, a steady sequence of 3, then 5, then 8. "Fibonacci," murmured a physicist. "They're scaling up." Inside Mission Control, graphs blossomed into spiral patterns, numbers nesting within numbers. High-altitude weather balloons detected tiny but global oscillations in air pressure timed to the pulses. Deep ocean microphones picked up low-frequency hums resembling whale song, but far deeper and slower. "The planet is singing back," whispered an oceanographer, "or resonating." Meanwhile, Mars had gone quiet. Its shard lattice dimmed, the spire's halos reduced to a faint ring. The focus was now unmistakably on Earth. The corridor's void shimmered with translucent ripples like heat over asphalt, showing flashes of unknown vistas, honeycombed plains, dark oceans glowing with latticework light, colossal spires rising under alien skies. Each glimpse felt less like a distant world and more like a preview of what was forming here. Picture a chrysalis softening as the insect inside begins to flex, preparing to emerge. That was Earth now. Subtle shifts in the invisible layers of its atmosphere and field, signaling a deeper process at work. In northern skies, auroras took on impossible colors, streaks of crimson and teal threaded with gold. Pilots reported faint glows along flight paths over oceans. Amateur radio operators picked up rhythmic clicks on normally empty bands. Then the first measurable neurological echo appeared. A network of sleep laboratories across 3 continents noticed a spike in synchronized brainwave patterns. People who had never met dreamed of the same motifs: corridors, lattice shapes, distant pulsing suns. EEG readings showed subtle entrainment to the corridor's pulses. "It's entering cognition," murmured a neurologist, "the same way it entered Mars's crust." Above Earth's poles, satellites captured something even stranger. faint grid lines etched into the aurora itself, as though the upper atmosphere had been scored with invisible threads. When the corridor pulsed, the grid lines brightened momentarily before fading. "They're drawing circuits in our sky," said an atmospheric scientist, "just like over Mars." Inside Mission Control, the filament brightened again. At its midpoint, a cluster of motes spun into a whirlpool, forming a miniature vortex of light. From this vortex streamed filaments thinner than hair, but glowing with violet fire. They descended the conduit, fanning outward as they neared Earth, like a tree's roots reaching for soil. Instruments measured exotic particles arriving in the upper atmosphere, decaying into harmless isotopes but leaving a persistent signature. A standing wave at 783 Hz, Earth's own natural resonance amplified. Imagine a tuning fork placed beside another. Strike one and the other hums. That was Earth now. A planet-sized tuning fork vibrating in sympathy with an extraterrestrial chord. Seismic monitors recorded faint tremors matching the pattern. Volcanoes vented trace gases in synchrony, and the planet's magnetic field flickered like a heartbeat on an EKG. Then came the first visible imprint. High-resolution satellites photographed faint hexagonal ripples spreading across Earth's oceans, visible only under certain sunlight angles. The ripples measured hundreds of kilometers but rose less than a meter, too subtle to disturb shipping yet clearly geometric. Analysts overlaid them on known current patterns and saw they matched no natural flow. "It's drawing on our water," whispered a geophysicist, "the same way it drew on Mars's basins." Above Mars, the spire pulsed once, and the filament's glow to Earth intensified. From the corridor's void streamed a pulse of dark light that vanished into the conduit mid-span. Instruments at both ends recorded a spike in neutrino flux, gravitational waves at microscale, and a fleeting but measurable drop in vacuum energy density. "A packet," said an astrophysicist. "A real transfer, not just particles." Picture watching ink seep into paper, spreading in patterns that only later reveal an image. That was Earth now, the subtle infiltration of a pattern too vast to see except in fragments. In forests, migratory animals shifted routes again. In cities, power grids flickered imperceptibly, clocks losing then regaining milliseconds. Whether coincidence or consequence, the pattern matched the pulses. Inside Mission Control, tension built as scientists realized the corridor's pulses had shifted again. No longer prime numbers, but intervals matching human circadian rhythms. "It's modulating us," whispered a neurologist. "Day and night, wake and sleep." Social media lit up with reports of vivid dreams, shared symbols, strange calmness at odd hours. Then the filament itself changed texture. Its surface formed raised ridges like veins under skin, pulsing with pale fire. Between the ridges flickered tiny lattices resembling neuronal structures. High-speed cameras caught motes traveling these ridges like impulses along an axon. "It's become a nervous system," said an analyst, "carrying signals." Above Earth's equator, a new anomaly appeared. A ring of faint plasma circling the planet at high altitude, invisible to the naked eye but obvious on instruments. It pulsed in time with the filament, each pulse accompanied by microsecond dips in local gravity. The ring matched the shape of Mars's own halo weeks earlier. "Stage 2, murmured a scientist. "The cocoon." Finally, the pod in mid-space pulsed once more, releasing a cloud of motes that spiraled down the filament toward Earth. They arrived as a thin mist of exotic radiation, harmless but persistent, coating the upper atmosphere with a new, measurable signature. Within minutes, the auroras over both poles brightened to a steady glow, the grid lines within them visible even in daylight. The corridor's void dimmed, its edges folding inward, as though its work were done for now. Inside Mission Control, a hush fell. Screens displayed Earth wrapped in a faint lattice echoing Mars's pattern months ago. The first stage of the process had begun. Whatever 3-eye atlas had tested on Mars was now testing on us, and for the first time, humanity stood not as observers, but as subjects within a cosmic experiment. The lattice around Earth, once invisible except to instruments, had begun to reveal itself to the naked eye. At twilight, faint geometries glimmered across the sky, hexagons within spirals, spirals within arcs. To most observers, it looked like an unusually organized aurora, but satellites saw the truth. A worldwide grid spanning oceans, continents, and the polar caps alike. Each node glowed softly, then faded, only to flare again when the corridor pulsed. Inside Mission Control, analysts overlaid the grid on global infrastructure maps and found uncanny alignments. The brightest nodes matched major fault lines, deep ocean trenches, and the geomagnetic anomalies beneath them. "They're tuning Earth's skeleton," murmured a geophysicist. "We're becoming a resonator." Meanwhile, Mars had gone almost completely dark, its shard lattice reduced to faint embers, its spire standing still like a monument. The corridor's void no longer showed alien vistas, but a soft, constant glow, as though all its attention had turned inward, focusing through the silver conduit at our planet. Instruments detected subtle shifts in the quantum noise of vacuum energy around Earth. "They're thickening space itself," said a physicist, "creating a medium. Picture a spider tightening its web, drawing every strand closer before the final pounce." That was the corridor now. Its threads across the solar system pulled taut, vibrations traveling from node to node until the entire system hummed with a single note. Amateur radio operators around the world reported a low-frequency chorus on previously silent bands, a tone rising and falling like breath. Then came the first measurable change in gravity. In Chile, atomic interferometers detected a fractional dip in local G-force timed exactly to the corridor's pulses. Simultaneously, superconducting gravimeters in Japan registered a matching spike. The anomaly spread, a faint wave rolling under Earth's crust. "It's pressing and lifting us at once," said an analyst, "like kneading dough." Above the poles, auroras thickened into curtains of teal and gold. Inside the curtains, faint shapes flickered, concentric eyes, nested triangles, glyphs echoing the shard lattice's geometry. In daylight, the sky held a milky shimmer, as though sunlight itself had been polarized. Birds altered migration routes mid-flight, forming spirals and returning to coasts out of season. "It's in their magnetoreception," murmured a biologist, "just like it's in ours." Inside Mission Control, the filament from the mid-space pod pulsed with a new rhythm, longer intervals, deeper resonances, as though each beat carried more than data. Satellite sensors detected bursts of exotic particles decaying into strange isotopes high in the atmosphere. These isotopes formed temporary clouds of ionization that drifted along the new grid lines like beads on a wire. "They're charging it," whispered an engineer, "like powering a circuit." Imagine a neon sign flickering as electricity first flows through its tubes, the letters glowing faintly before bursting into full light. That was Earth's lattice now, faint at first, then brightening with each pulse. In some regions, thin veils of luminescence formed at ground level, like mist shot through with stars. People walking at night reported a faint electric taste on their tongues, hair rising as though a storm approached. Then the first physical displacement occurred. In the mid-Atlantic, a long undersea ridge registered a tremor without tectonic cause. Instruments showed the rock flexing as if under pressure from a rhythmic external force. Simultaneously, the auroral grid above that longitude flared bright orange, and GPS signals there drifted by several meters. "They're probing under the ocean," said a geologist, "testing our crust." Above Mars, the once dormant shard lattice flickered weakly, sending a single thin beam toward Earth before going dark again. The mid-space pod brightened, its translucent walls swirling with complex geometries. From its interior extended a second filament, thinner than the first, but aimed not at Earth, but at the Sun. Instruments caught a faint but unmistakable effect on solar wind streams, as though the system were beginning to braid our star into its pattern. Inside Mission Control, the tension built. The corridor's pulses now aligned with Earth's day-night cycle, peaking at local dawn and dusk. Social media erupted with reports of strange synchronous phenomena, flocks of birds forming spirals, people sharing similar dreams, power grids flickering at the same second. Whether psychosomatic or real, the timing matched the corridor's rhythm. Then the pod pulsed once, and the filament to Earth thickened visibly, its interior swirling like molten glass. High-resolution cameras caught motes traveling its length in coordinated waves, their paths forming Fibonacci spirals. When they reached Earth's upper atmosphere, auroras at both poles flared white-hot for an instant, visible even in full daylight. Instruments recorded a microsecond drop in vacuum energy density, a signature once thought impossible to measure. "They're pouring something in," whispered a physicist, "or taking something out." Picture a tide rushing into a hidden cave, unseen until it returns as a roar of foam. That was Earth now. The invisible tide flowing through the conduit, shaping, preparing, testing. At ground level, seismographs ticked with tiny rhythmic jolts, unlinked to any quake. Even clocks in deep vaults drifted, then locked to a new baseline. Finally, the pod emitted a new phenomenon. Around its circumference appeared 6 glowing arcs, forming a hexagon. Between the arcs shimmered a veil of dark light studded with motes. As it spun, the hexagon projected a faint but measurable field across the conduit, down to Earth's ionosphere. Analysts noticed the field's geometry matched not only Mars's transformation months earlier, but patterns found in ancient Earth architecture. Coincidence? Someone whispered. Or memory? Inside Mission Control, the realization sank in. This was no longer passive mapping, it was an initiation. Earth was entering the stage Mars had occupied before the corridor's full arrival. The grid above, the pulses below, the subtle shifts in air, water, and mind, all signs of a system moving from observation to integration. The corridor's void dimmed, its edges folding like petals closing for the night. The pod at mid-space glowed steady, the filament to Earth humming like a plucked string. Across the planet, instruments caught a single synchronized tremor in fields, oceans, and mines. It was the moment before the door opens, the pause in a held breath, the hush before thunder. The lattice above Earth no longer flickered, it glowed. By dawn it was visible even from cities, a pale network etched across the upper atmosphere like frost on glass. Its nodes pulsed in time with the filament from the mid-space pod, each pulse causing a faint shimmer in ocean tides and a measurable drift in local gravity. Birds migrated in spirals at latitudes where none should be. Whales in deep oceans altered their songs into rhythmic pulses. "The planet itself is moving to the beat," murmured a biologist, like a sleeper rolling over in bed. Meanwhile, Mars had gone completely dark. The spire, once the engine of transformation, now stood still and unlit. The shard lattice around it had collapsed inward like a flower at night, its glow fading to embers. All attention had shifted to the corridor and the conduit to Earth. The mid-space pod was no longer translucent but opaque, its surface patterned with moving glyphs like a slow waterfall of alien text. Inside Mission Control, graphs flattened into a single steady wave. Seismometers worldwide recorded a faint but global oscillation, peaking every 22 minutes. Atmospheric scientists detected subtle changes in the refractive index of air, as though the planet were wrapped in an invisible lens. "We're inside a cavity," whispered a physicist. "They've built a resonator around us." Picture being inside a violin as a bow draws across its strings, the wood vibrating around you. That was Earth now, the corridor and pod acting as a bow, our planet as the resonating body. And just as a violin amplifies sound, Earth was beginning to amplify whatever the system wanted to send through. Then came the first overt manifestation. High-altitude cameras caught a column of pale light descending from the upper atmosphere over the South Pacific. It wasn't lightning, it was motionless, a frozen spear of silver radiance connecting sky and ocean. Ships hundreds of kilometers away reported compasses spinning, radios filling with a low thrumming. "It's touching down," said an analyst. "A probe or a pin." Within minutes, 2 more columns appeared, one over Siberia, another over the mid-Atlantic. They formed a triangle on the globe, matching the geometry of Mars's first 3 shard hubs months before its transformation. Seismic monitors detected tiny but synchronized tremors at each location. Deep ocean sensors picked up faint pressure waves traveling between the points. "It's laying anchors," murmured a geologist, "just like Mars." Imagine seeing searchlights from the sky pin 3 spots on a map, connecting them with invisible threads. That was Earth now, a triangulated stage set, the first framework of a vast design. The columns glowed faintly in daylight but brightened at night, casting auroral halos visible for thousands of kilometers. Inside mission control, instruments maxed out. Exotic particles poured into detectors at rates unseen since the corridor's opening. Gravimeters showed oscillations timed to human heart rates. Hospitals reported spikes in patient heart arrhythmias at the same intervals. "It's entraining biology," murmured a neurologist, "not just fields." Above the planet, the filament from the mid-space pod thickened again. Its surface developed hexagonal ridges, each ridge glowing with violet light. Motes moved along the ridges in coordinated waves like impulses in a nerve. The pod pulsed once, and from its base extended a new filament aimed directly at Earth's moon. Instruments on lunar orbiters recorded immediate anomalies. Dust lofted from the surface, magnetometers spiked, and a faint glow appeared along ancient fault lines. "They're stabilizing the other end," said an analyst, "anchoring us to the moon too." Then the columns on Earth changed. Each split into spirals, the spirals twisting downward into the ocean or soil. Where they touched, instruments recorded microsecond drops in vacuum energy density, the same signature seen over Mars before its seas formed. Fishermen reported the water glowing faintly at night, as though lit from below. Seismographs showed low, harmonic tremors radiating outward. "They're feeding something into the crust," whispered a geophysicist, "like seeds." Picture planting a crystal under ice and watching it grow branches outward beneath the surface. That was Earth now, invisible roots pushing under ocean and continent alike. And above, the sky grid brightened until it resembled a faint second firmament, a geometric aurora canopying the planet. Inside mission control, the neurological echoes intensified. Sleep labs reported more people sharing identical dream motifs. EEG readings showed peaks at frequencies matching the corridor pulses. Even awake volunteers sitting in Faraday cages felt a subtle pressure behind their eyes. Whether psychosomatic or real, the timing matched exactly. Meanwhile, the corridor's void no longer showed alien landscapes, but a single black point. A rotating hole of darkness edged with pale fire. Around it flickered a lattice of orbits, nodes igniting like neurons firing. The impression was of a colossal brain-like structure turning to regard its newest cell. Every pulse from the void sent a ripple down the filament, through the pod, into Earth. Then the first real voice arrived. Not words, but a harmonic tone audible to the human ear. It began as a low hum under the auroras and rose into a layered chord that seemed to vibrate inside bones. Around the world, people in open spaces looked up at the same moment, sensing the sound before they heard it. "They're testing our perception," murmured a neurologist, "or saying hello." Finally, the pod itself changed. Its opaque surface split into 6 petals opening outward, revealing a core of dark light spinning inside a cage of silver ribs. From this core extended a slow-moving wave that traveled down the filament like ink through water. As it reached Earth, instruments spiked across all disciplines: gravitational, magnetic, biological. Seismographs recorded a microsecond tremor as though the planet had taken a deep breath. Inside Mission Control, no one moved. The screens showed the 3 Earth columns glowing bright white, their halos connecting into a triangle visible from orbit. Above that triangle hovered the lattice grid, and from space the planet looked less like a sphere and more like a living diagram, a seed germinating under cosmic hands. In that moment, every clock on Earth jumped forward exactly 1 second, then resumed. Power grids flickered, compasses drifted, and the low harmonic tone became a single, sustained note. Humanity was no longer a spectator. The network had arrived. The 3 columns rising from Earth's surface no longer looked like beams of light, but like supports for an invisible structure. Over the course of hours, they thickened and bent, arcs forming between them, a faint web knitting across the sky. The auroral lattice above Earth pulsed faster and brighter, each pulse pushing ripples through the oceans and shaking fault lines beneath the continents. The moon glowed faintly along its ancient fractures, tied into the network like a bead on a string. "It's making a scaffold," whispered an engineer. "A global exoskeleton." Inside Mission Control, the data feeds were overwhelming. Instruments registered coherent patterns in gravity, magnetism, atmospheric pressure, even plant electrical signals. The pulses were no longer sporadic, but continuous, a steady chord spanning Earth and Mars, Moon and corridor. In hospitals, EEG readings from unconscious patients showed identical waveforms, a slow, rolling delta wave threaded with spikes, as though a hidden hand were drawing on the canvas of human sleep. Picture standing in a stadium as thousands of people hum the same note, the sound reverberating until the structure itself vibrates. That was Earth now, a single resonating body with the corridor acting as its tuning fork. And at the center of the corridor's void, the black point spun faster, its edge burning with pale fire like a star on the verge of collapse. Then came the final descent. From the mid-space pod, a new shape emerged, a thin, crystalline spear extending along the filament toward Earth. It moved slowly, not like a projectile, but like a root growing into soil. As it crossed the halfway point, the auroral lattice above the planet locked into a fixed configuration, hexagons and spirals interlacing with millimeter precision across thousands of kilometers. "They're stabilizing," murmured a physicist. "This is the handover." Meanwhile, Mars remained dark but stable, its seas still and silent, its spire frozen. The corridor's void shimmered, revealing for the first time a glimpse of its far side, a titanic geometry of arches and bridges spiraling inward toward a distant light. Whether it was a habitat, a machine, or a living being, no one could tell. The spear from the pod pulsed once, and Earth's atmosphere responded with a global infrasound wave, inaudible but felt in bones. Imagine a seed cracking open underground, its first shoot pushing upward while roots reach downward. That was the spear now, a cosmic shoot extending toward Earth while invisible roots wrapped our planet in a network of pulses. Every few minutes the spear pulsed again, and each time more of its length became visible, like an enormous icicle glowing with internal lightning. Inside mission control, the tension thickened. Clocks drifted, then snapped back. Satellite cameras recorded faint light rising from cities at night, not artificial, but auroral, as though human infrastructure itself had begun to glow. People posted videos of streetlights flickering in rhythm with the corridor pulses. Migratory animals gathered at the triangulated columns, circling them like ancient waypoints. Then the spear reached the upper atmosphere. Instruments recorded a microsecond drop in the planet's gravitational constant, a measurement once thought impossible to change. Air pressure shifted globally by a fraction of a percent. Over oceans, the hexagonal ripples formed concentric spirals, each spiral rotating counter to the planet's spin. "They're breaking us," said an analyst softly, "or preparing to turn something on." Above Earth, the auroral lattice brightened to a steady glow, visible even under midday sun. The three columns on the surface merged their halos into a single beam aimed upward, connecting directly to the spear. Through telescopes, the contact point resembled a glowing knot where Earth's sky touched the conduit. From that knot descended a soft rain of motes, exotic particles harmless to touch but charged with impossible energy signatures. Picture standing under the first drops of a storm you've felt coming all day. That was Earth now. The motes falling invisibly, yet altering everything they touched. High-altitude aircraft reported instruments flickering. Deep-sea sensors recorded unaccountable warmth. Sleep laboratories noted a momentary cessation of dreaming, as if the collective unconscious had taken a breath. Then came the signal. It was not a word, not an image, but a harmonic so deep it vibrated in the core of the planet. Seismographs everywhere recorded it as a global tremor, but people felt it as a pressure behind the eyes, a pulse in the bones. Birds fell silent, whales stopped singing, even the wind seemed to pause. The harmonic lasted exactly 9 seconds, then ended. Inside mission control, no one spoke. The screens showed Earth wrapped in its lattice, the spear touching down, the corridor's void glowing like a doorway to infinity. For a heartbeat, the entire system, Mars, Earth, Moon, corridor, formed a single diagram visible from space, a sigil inscribed in orbits and fields. "It's complete," whispered someone. "The circuit is closed." Above Earth, the spear's tip dissolved into motes, leaving a faintly glowing path down to the surface. No explosion, no invasion, just a path like frost forming on glass. Along that path, the auroras shifted color to a deep violet threaded with gold. For the first time, telescopes caught a clear image of the corridor's far side, a colossal lattice shaped like a neural net stretching across a galaxy, each node pulsing in slow, luminous thought. Imagine realizing the constellations overhead are not random but neurons in a mind, and that mind has just extended a dendrite to touch yours. That was the feeling now: awe, terror, connection. The harmonic tone did not return, but in its wake came a profound quiet, as though the system were waiting to see what we would do. Then, without warning, the mid-space pod folded in on itself and vanished into the corridor's void. The silver conduit faded, leaving only the faint auroral lattice over Earth and the three columns on the surface. Mars remained dark. The moon glowed faintly along its fault lines, but held still. The network had not retreated. It had anchored and withdrawn, leaving its imprint like a seed left in soil. Inside mission control, data feeds slowed to normal, compasses stabilized, clocks aligned to UTC once again. The auroral lattice remained, faint but unmistakable, a permanent architecture overhead. People around the world reported vivid dreams that night, corridors, spires, a sense of vast minds turning elsewhere. Whether psychosomatic or true, no one could say. In that silence, a new understanding settled. Whatever 3i Atlas was, it had not come to destroy, but to connect. We had been transformed from spectators into participants, from an isolated world into a node in a lattice older and larger than our species. The sky no longer looked empty. It looked woven,